You end up working on books with the Dalai Lama, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Anthony Ray Hinton's book, my book, of course.
The author of my 104th book club pick, Lara Love Hardin.
I was keeping a secret. I called you and I had to talk to you about something. I was terrified. Those bad guys and those felons that you were investigating, I was one of them. I'd become addicted to opiates. I was taking 60 a day, led to me committing crimes. And I was arrested, and there's a part of me that was glad it was over. I would have died before I admitted I had a problem. Because I remember, I'm walking down the stairs, the sheriff's deputy is gonna bring me inside, and I was like, please, where's my son? And he said, you will never see your son again. You should not be anyone's mother. And I thought it was better for my children to have a mother who was dead than a mother who was in prison, wanting to end my life, and tried to in jail.
And so I hung my head in shame, and then I tried to hang myself. That was 11 years, 1 month, and 1 day ago. Today, finally, I am lifting my head back up.
It was the first time in my life that I was honest. This feeling of lightness is better than any drug I've ever taken in my life.
Do you remember how we first met?
You emailed me. You read the Book of Joy, and you sent a email. I can't remember what it said exactly.
It was I think 2 or 3 lines. I remember it wasn't long. I don't think it was long, right?
I don't know, I feel like I could find it.
You probably could. And do you remember the gist of what I wrote?
It was how much you loved the book. You wanted to do a book.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Googling you.
What did you find? Do you remember?
I mean, I saw your picture. I started reading about you a little bit. And I was like, oh, she is interesting.
So I had read the Book of Joy, and I had been approached and talked to different people about doing a book. The issues I was having is people wanted a tell-all, like me to talk about things that I didn't want to talk about. I didn't think it was appropriate. And I wanted to write a book that to help people. So I had listened to the Book of Joy because I love listening to books. I remember the book really moved me, and it was the only time that I ever wrote to anybody at random for a book ever. And I said, you know what? They seem like good energy. I'm going to write it. And I'm like, if they're writing books like this seems like a place I'd like to be around. And then I remember maybe a couple of weeks later, I get an email from a Lara Love, and I kept thinking, that's a cool name. And you said, hi, I'd want to talk to you about this. And I remember sitting, when we had our phone call, sitting in my car, actually, talking to you on the phone because there wasn't Zoom yet. People really weren't Zooming. I remember thinking, I really like her.
I remember because it was so rare for the agency I was at then to have anybody incoming like that. Normally we would go out and kind of pursue people to do projects. So 99.9% of the time when we get an email like that would never respond, with an invitation or a conversation. And I remember talking to you and you saying that you want to do something impactful. And we're a very mission-driven agency. And the goal is impact. And I remember talking to you and thinking, she's going to do a book about strength. Never once thought tell all. It was strength.
You're the only person. I remember sitting with a publishing company before, a big one, a huge one. And they were like, this is the kind of book we want. And I sat there, I was like, I can't write that book. And I was like, I'm not doing that. Can I ask you a question? You never took books that people wrote. Why my book? I didn't know this about your agency. I just knew, I read the book or I listened to the book. I loved it. Why? Because I found out later how many projects you would turn away or walk away from.
99.999%.
Yes. So I'm just honestly, why me?
I think it was after just speaking with you, and I trust my instincts. And I knew at that time, you had a really powerful story to tell. You were going to have a powerful impact. And I remember telling the rest of the team at the agency. And
well, you had to sell me.
Yeah,
not everybody was on board.
Yeah.
You had to pitch me hard.
I had to pitch you. I was a little scared of you.
Were you? Well, that's going to come in a moment.
I'm still a little scared of you. No, I'm not scared of you now.
Well, now I know why. Because you would say to me, I'm a little scared of you, Evie. I'm a little intimidated by you. And I remember thinking, why? And so we do the book. We're working on becoming Bulletproof. Now, you help me through the process because a lot of what I had the content, but sometimes you need help with writing. And I remember you guys were like, look, I can help with collaborative writing. And you helped me streamline my stories, get my thoughts on paper. And I would hand in like just tons and tons of stuff. And you were like an editor, but not really an editor. You're like an editor on steroids and then some. And you would help me like layer my stories and tell them in a great way. So you take all my content and really help me finesse it. I learned so much about writing from you and like learning. I didn't even want to write about myself.
Yeah, you did not at all.
I was like, no, let's just tell people what they need to know. And you made me write the first chapters about me. Why do you do that?
Because in a book, people have to relate to you. They have to, especially in something that has some memoir in it, you know, like they are looking at the world through your point of view. And so if you're just telling them your tips, which are amazing, then you're kind of coming at them. You're not with them and they're not alongside you. And, you know, most people don't read, right? So you have this hurdle with books. Like I love books. That's my lane. But most people don't read. Most people, when they read, don't read nonfiction books. They're going to read fiction. And people who read often don't finish the book. So there's story is what hooks people in. It what makes them relate to you, understand you, so that they're open to the things you're going to teach them. Because you don't want to be preaching at someone in a book or telling them what to do.
Who taught me when you tell people something, you don't say, this is what you should do. You say, this is we. You always taught me to use we.
Yeah, because you're alongside them. And when you're vulnerable and connecting with people, then it draws them in. It actually makes them closer. You know, I remember like the first thing we did was work on a book proposal because in nonfiction, unlike fiction, you sell a book from a proposal before you've written it. And so, and that's your best guess of what that book's going to be. Yeah, there was, I remember a little bit of struggle with you in terms of like telling personal stories.
Probably a lot. You can be honest.
Yeah, a lot.
A lot. I didn't.
Because, you know, as a special agent, it wasn't like you were going around sharing your personal stories with the world. It's a very much like, right?
I think also you're taught to like be humble. And I was scared. I was like, I don't want to come off like, look at me because I'm not like that. And I really struggled with the stories in the beginning. And you had to talk me through it a lot. Like, Evie, just, this is what you're supposed to do. And I was like, I don't want to write about myself. This book is not meant to be about me. You know, and you really had to talk me through it. Like they were like almost therapy sessions where I pushed back quite a bit. And you did a really good job handling me because I can be a bit of I don't want to say a bulldozer, but like maybe sort of a bulldozer, like very strong, like, hey, no, I don't want to do this. And you listened. You're a good listener.
You're also open-minded though, like you're a bulldozer, but you also listened and you're like, okay, let me consider it that way. I know the 9/11 story you didn't want to tell at first that you opened your book with.
Yes. You made me open with that. Uh-huh. You made me do a lot of things, but I do listen. I understand why we had to tell it because I remember thinking, I'm like, it was such a horrible event. I'm writing a book and I'm using this event. This was my concern. I'm using this event to make myself shine or make my book shine. Or I just was like, with all this sadness and you had to talk me through it and you're like, no, that's not what you do. I learned so many things in the writing. I even learned, what is it? Women read the most books? Is that correct?
Yeah, nonfiction. It's like the demographic is 40 to 65-year-old women.
65. What's the percentage of people who read nonfiction that are
I would
women?
be making something up if I told you, but I don't know. But the majority
is women.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that is? Why do women want to learn and men think like, I know everything?
I think, I don't know. I think it's a little bit of conditioning. I think men probably read more of like the productivity and the business books, although I love productivity and business books. Like I'll read those too. But I don't know. Maybe they read more as kids and it just carries over. I don't know.
Most people, when they read a book, nonfiction, they don't get past chapter 3. I don't know where I'm getting that from.
Yeah, I don't know what chapter 3, but most people don't finish it. And so you have to design nonfiction books like they're fiction, right? To the design, not make things up because they're true stories, but there's little tricks to keep people reading, you know, like your last line, your first line to hook them in. And, you know, I think with that, just to go back to that first story, Because when we were talking about it, I wasn't seen as about like making you look great, although you were, it's an amazing story of bravery and heroism on your part and vulnerability and fear and conquering. So thematically, it fit your book. It's a story that illustrated the things that you were teaching in the book. And that's really like how you choose the stories, because people will just comprehend it more. Like you can talk about resilience as a theory, and then but you talk about or mental fortitude or tenacity, but then you tell a story of standing in a freezing cold booth for 12 hours at Camp David, where you have to cut your leggings off you because they're frozen to you, and that story, you're like, wow, look what she could do, look what she could endure, look what she could survive. And then that gives people hope and inspiration. What?
I know what day that was. Actually the inauguration, where I was standing on the concrete in shoes, and this was so common because we couldn't really dress super warm, and probably like just standing there all those hours. And I remember going to the bathroom and cutting I had like 2 layers of pantyhose, socks. I was layered up, and it did not matter, because when you're standing still and freezing cold, it doesn't matter. Even those heat things, I had them in my shoes. After 30 minutes, I couldn't feel my feet. And I remember like finding a nearby building. I had like a quick bathroom break, and I pulled out my buck knife, and I flipped my buck knife open, and I cut and I couldn't even feel my fingers, and I cut my pantyhose, and I'm sitting there and I'm rubbing my feet, and I was in pain. And then like I almost didn't want the break. Like sometimes when we would work, I didn't even want a break, because the moment I paused or sat down, I was like, I don't think I can get back up there and do that. But I remember, we wrote that story about the freezing cold.
So you see how powerful that story is that you just told, like to illustrate the ideas. That's the power of story. And plus people don't know this world, right? So you were a unique like window onto a world that people only know what they see on movies.
Well, my book came to be because you had faith in me and in the book. And what was interesting was I think we were about halfway into it, and you called me one day, or you text me rather, because today we text before we call people. We don't even call people anymore. Although you and I call
I
each
call.
other.
Yeah, you call me randomly really early in the morning, California time.
Yes. And you said, Evie, I have to talk to you about something. Do you remember that day?
I remember. I think it was after the book sold. So the book was happening, right? And you had a contract and a deadline to deliver the manuscript. And I called you and I had to talk to you about something. I was terrified because the whole time we've been working together and you were telling your stories and talking about investigating the bad guys and the felons and all of the work that you did as an investigator, right? Besides guarding presidents, I was keeping a secret from you. And I was so worried that if I didn't tell you my secret, it could harm your book going forward or your association with me. It would harm your reputation, right? Or you would not want to associate with me, basically. And we were becoming friends, right? Because you can't have those conversations and that therapy without getting close to people. I mean, that's the best working relationship. So I wanted to give you a chance to break up with me, basically.
You did. You were calling to break up with me.
I don't remember the exact words, but the gist of it was I was calling to tell you that I was once convicted of 32 felonies. I was on probation, I think, at the time, or just recently off. And that those bad guys and those felons that you were investigating, I was one of them. I was terrified to tell you that.
Why?
I was terrified because I was becoming your friend, because I liked you, and I was terrified of judgment, which, you know, obviously you're not that way, but I didn't know how it was going to go. And I was keeping that secret from everybody. So it was so terrifying. What is that terror? It's rejection. It's like, oh, I liked you before I knew this, but now, no. In general, not with you specifically, but in general in the world.
Do you remember what I said?
Yeah, I don't remember specifically. I know you were not judging me. You were open.
I didn't cancel my book.
No, you didn't cancel your book. You didn't cancel me in your life.
In fact, I remember you telling me, and I didn't know what it was. So I said, okay, tell me what happened. And we'll get into what happened in a moment. I said, walk me through it. Tell me everything. Just because I was like, let me have awareness. And I said, okay. I said, that is something you did. It is not who you are.
Yeah.
And I said, I can't think of a better person than a convicted felon to help me write my book and get it out there in the world. We might sell more books.
Right.
I did not care.
You didn't care. Although I remember we went away together. Do you remember this?
Hawaii.
Hawaii. We were in Maui. And I remember the restaurant because we had that conversation. I was like, phew, that's done. And then we were at a restaurant having dinner. There was French onion soup involved. That's all I remember. But you were like, now give me the details. And I was like,
yes, because you gave me the overview on the phone. And I didn't want to, as an interviewer, I was like, let her just tell me what she needs to tell me. I knew you were working through it. Mm-hmm. Then I remember in Hawaii, we were eating. I said, okay, tell me the story. Tell me your story.
It's interesting because even when I first told you, I was telling you just a little bit to be safe. And then I think when we were at dinner, I told you a little bit more to be safe. I mean, obviously, we were doing your book where you're the human lie detector, right? Like, that was one of the stories. And I was like, oh, I have to make sure that I'm being super honest and telling her the truth. And so, my story is that I'd struggled with addiction. I'd become addicted to opiates. And the progression of that addiction over time led to me committing crimes because I had lost all my money. I was just in survival mode, in desperate survival mode.
How did you start taking opiates, by the way?
Like so many other people, they were prescribed to me.
For what?
Right? In the back before the opiate crisis was a crisis. Like there's 48 million Americans right now struggling with substance use disorder. Back in the, I would say 90s, mid-90s, opiates like Vicodin, specifically pain medication, narcotics, you were given sample packs. Childbirth, you had an earache. They were given out. There was such a promotion of opiates at the time of these narcotics. And I remember the doctors just handing out little sample. Oh, try this. They were in a dish at the doctor's office.
Stop.
I'm 100% serious. I remember them being in a dish and these little bubble wrap samples. Like they would give you a sample of an eye cream at the store. And it was just these little packs of opiates, of Vicodin specifically is the thing, or childbirth, or you're in a mood. They were just prescribed so freely and widely. And I think there was such a promotion and push by the drug reps and the companies then. I don't know the exact history of all of that, but I think that was a big reason why there's lawsuits now and why so many people became addicted. And so for me, they had been prescribed to me legitimately. And I remember taking one day. My kids were little. I had 3 little boys under the age of 5. My marriage was falling apart. I was depressed and no ability. I would never say to someone, I'm depressed or I'm struggling or I'm unhappy. It's just not how I grew up. You didn't talk about your feelings, or as much as I could pull that out of other people. I was very shut down that way, and certainly would never ask for help. And so I remember taking a pain pill one day, and the way it reacted in my brain, because I think everybody's brain chemistry is different, it made me feel like everything was going to be okay, right? It gave me a sense of well-being. It didn't make me sleepy. It gave me energy, and I loved the feeling. And then it took 2 to have that same feeling. And then that's just the nature of addiction and tolerance and progression. And I remember one time taking, I think it was 3 in a day. And I was like, whoa, I have a problem. Because I grew up in a family with a lot of addiction and alcoholism. And I was like, I will never be like that. And I remember one day going to my husband at the time and saying, I took 3 of these pills a day. And, they're prescribed for pain. I'm not in pain, but I'm worried about it. And he was like, oh, everybody takes them. He kind of put them up. I was like, here, can you take these, throw them away. and he put him up in the linen closet. And then I stopped for a few days. And then I was like, oh, I could stop. So I pulled him down from I remember getting a chair and climbing up in that linen closet because he was very tall, and pulling them down. And by the end of really was like a decade on and off, like not constantly, obviously, but I remember that feeling of taking one that I got from taking one or two or three, I was taking 60 a day.
How did you get them?
So they were prescribed to me. Everybody had old prescriptions in their house. And at that time, you could order them online from doctors in Florida. You just have there was just huge ability to get that online. They would get FedEx to my house.
It's interesting. It happens gradually, but at what point did things start to shift even?
Years and years later. And so I finally did stop, and I stopped for 6 years, completely off of them for 6 years. I'd gotten remarried, had another son, so I had 4 boys. And the person I'd remarried was someone I had who had also struggled with addiction. And we both met and got married when we were in recovery. And he relapsed and started smoking heroin and brought it in the house. And that was real. And I found it. And I remember driving to my kids' school and Googling, like, how do you smoke heroin? And so I think part of it was the 6 years that I had were surface level. Like, the stopping was willpower. It wasn't, it wasn't deep within me, and I wasn't okay. And I was pretending I was okay. I looked like I was okay on the outside, but I hadn't really done any work to be okay internally. And so it just took that little bit of proximity. They have a saying, like, if you hang out in a barber shop, you're going to get a haircut. So, I hadn't done the sort of deep internal work. I had 6 years of like white knuckling, and the minute there was opportunity and proximity, addiction kind of progresses without you taking anything. It's progressive. And so I had found heroin in my house and found out he was smoking it and keeping it a secret. And
Were you mad?
I was mad, yeah. I was, it's interesting because I could have compassion for someone that I wasn't married to who was struggling, right? But that was really hard. I was like, no, we're building a business. We just bought a house, and again, I just internalized it all, right? I kept everything inside. And then I was like, well, I'm going to try this, smoke it. And that was really the beginning of from that moment to everything falling apart was 11 months. It was like a year.
So when you go from smoking it, you smoked it, and then you went to using needles too.
So that was, so long before that happened.
Yeah.
So I, in 11 months, lost all our money, was not able to pay the bills, buy groceries. I started stealing, and I was arrested. And it was only when I got out on bail for a little bit of time that there were
That's
needles.
when you did the needle.
Yeah.
So tell me how the stealing, because you got charged with 32 counts, 32 felony counts. So tell me how the stealing happened. What started that?
I mean, it wasn't as impressive as 32 felonies sound, right? And, basically I was in a desperate state, right? And I think with addiction, that desperation is so hard to explain. Like, you think your survival depends on you doing the drug again, right? And in my mind, I was like, if I just am okay physically and mentally, then I can figure out how to stop, right? It's not logical. So there's a lot of crazy, compulsive, obsessive behaviors that go around with that. So basically, as everything was falling apart, I wasn't going to work anymore. I had a business. I wasn't handling that. I wasn't paying the bills. And so all the money is going, and we still have mortgage. And I had 6 children in private school, my 4 boys and 2 stepchildren. and a mortgage and car payments, and I wasn't going to work and I had no money, and I was just trying to hold it together. I was just trying to get groceries, right? So I would go, my kids were in private school, and I knew in private school, it was Montessori private school, and we all, all the moms would park and then bring our kids into school, and everybody left their cars unlocked and left their purses in the car. So I would just go in and take like a little cash, get gas money or get lunch money for the kids, or then I would take a credit card. And in my mind, so I started taking credit cards from people I knew and didn't know at school, and things in my world, like my private school parking lot, my neighbors, like ways in which I had access. And in my mind, because in general, like not in my right mind, I would never take anything from you, right? Like I would give you, like, what do you need? But so you're going against like your whole core values. And like I knew that, like I knew right from wrong, and the compulsion of it, I couldn't stop. And I think that's really hard for people to understand. And, I stole a check from my closest neighbor who I really cared about and wrote it at the grocery store. And the felonies, one, I pled guilty to things I didn't do, right? Which we can talk about. I also did things that I was never charged for. So, it was interesting. And basically, if I'm using your credit card, if I take your credit card out of your purse and use it at the grocery store and then use it at the gas station, every time you swipe that card, it's a felony. But I wasn't particularly a great criminal when I got caught. But also, I remember this is like how out of your like mind you are. Like I was using a credit card that didn't belong to me at the grocery store, but I put in my phone number for the like club card discount, right? Like there's no logic to that. It's not like this grand.
So you use it at the grocery store, and then when they say, "Hey, put your phone number in here
to get money off,"
and you're using somebody else's credit card,
and I put
and
in
you're thinking, "Let me get the points while I'm at it."
Yeah, or let me why I should get the milk for $4.99 instead of $6.99, even though it's a
save this
stolen credit
person
card.
money.
Right.
Yes.
So there was that kind of like.
So you put your phone number in.
I put my phone number in. Also, you're on, use it at the gas station. You're on camera. Like it wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't. A big, crazy, smart, premeditated scam. It was just like small, desperate acts of trying to keep it together until I could get it together.
You said something before. You said a lot of people don't understand how addiction works. And I don't.
Mm-hmm.
But I will tell you, and I think I've said this to you in the past, I abstain from many things because I feel that I am not a person who can manage something like that. I don't drink alcohol at all. I don't gamble at all. I've never done drugs, ever. I've made those choices from when I was younger because I felt intuitively I am not someone who should be doing those things. I don't know how to explain it or express it, but I just knew enough that if when I would travel sometimes with work, and sometimes we'd go to Vegas or different places, I would travel the world, and a lot of the guys I'd work with, like, hey, we have a break, let's go gamble. I would never go. I was like, nope. I was afraid that if I sat down in that chair, I was like, I think I am that person who won't get up. And that's why I have abstained from so many things and I don't know, where it comes from. So I don't understand. And then I sort of understand something about what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, I think I had that thinking also because I had, when I was 19, my sister, who was 3 years older than me, she became a very extreme alcoholic as a teenager, and she died as a passenger in a drunk driving accident. Right. I had a brother who was a heroin addict from a young age that I didn't know about. I just know he stayed in the basement, and my family never talked about anything. Right. And he died of a drug overdose. So in my mind, I was similar. I was like, I will never do that. Like my focus is school, but I didn't. I couldn't escape it. Like I couldn't escape both my genetics and the fact that I was not okay inside, right? And I was pretending I was okay. And I think that's what made me more susceptible to it. Like I was a late bloomer to addiction. And I didn't like alcohol. Like the first time I ever did like drank hard alcohol, I had 2 rum and cokes in Massachusetts and I was 17. And I ended up, at a high school party. I got super drunk from those 2 rum and cokes, like blackout drunk, got taken in an ambulance to the hospital and my stomach pumped. While I was at the hospital, like I don't remember this at the time, like that's all it took for me. They thought, oh, she must have taken something or she was drugged because it was just such an extreme reaction in my body. But I kept saying over and over again, I'm so lonely. I'm so lonely. And to me, what horrified me about that experience, because the police were involved and my mom was called, and was not that I had to leave a high school party in an ambulance and have my stomach pumped, was that I had said, I'm so lonely. And so I was like, I'm never going to drink alcohol like that again because I was out of control. And so it was like this area of wanting to be so in control of my emotional and my interior world so nobody knows and I could pretend that I have everything together and I'm okay and I don't need anything. And so that was just kind of how I was. So I think I outran my genetics and my mental health for as long as I could until I couldn't anymore.
How did they catch you?
I was on camera like for the neighbor's check. That was really what happened.
Neighbor's check?
Like I wrote a
check at the
check
supermarket?
at the grocery store.
Okay.
And I had Caden in my arms. He was 3, and I was getting groceries. And in my mind, I had this thing in my mind because what I try to explain is like I knew right from wrong. It wasn't like I didn't think it was wrong. I just couldn't stop, right? Like both things were true. And so but in my mind, I was making it justifying a little better. Like, okay, these people that I care about or that I'm hurting or that I'm stealing from, they can write like the credit card, they'll claim fraud and then they won't actually have to pay any money. Or they can, report that their check was stolen so they won't actually lose money. So in my mind, which doesn't make sense when you really like look into it, but in my mind, it was less hurtful, even though I was really hurting people I cared about in my community, my neighbors.
Do you know the dollar amount they charged you with?
I think it was $19,000 that I paid back. And honestly, the amount I actually sold was $900.
Why'd they charge you 19?
Because, so I was, when I was arrested and they worked out a plea deal. And when I remember meeting with the public defenders, I had no money for it was a public defenders.
Most don't.
Yeah. And they said, you plead guilty to all of these things and then you won't go to prison for 27 years. And I remember looking through that list. And at the time, I was so ashamed. I was so in this place of fear and shame and despair. When you're in that place, it's not like you advocate for yourself. I couldn't be like I knew there were a ton of things. I was reading this list and I was like, I never stole anyone's credit card at Costco. There's a lot of things on there because there's a lot of people who are victims of crime like that, financial crimes. And so it was I was happy to do that because it meant I was not going to lose my children forever, my boys. So I pled guilty and then I was responsible for paying back all of that restitution, which I did.
So plea deals is a common thing. Most people who are arrested, they do plea deals. And the way they work is the system says, look, we can go to trial. You have the right to go to court. You go to trial. And you can fight this. If you fight it, you're going to get the maximum, or we'll give you, 7 years. But if you play nice, and if you say, okay, I plead guilty to these things, I won't put you through all that trouble of going to court and all that, then you know what, we'll do you a solid, we'll give you 2 years. But if you make us go to court and we win, then we're going to give you the full thing. And that is how most plea deals work. And it is not uncommon that people will be in a situation where they may plead guilty to things that they're like, I didn't do this. But at that point, where you're just thinking of your kids, which is what you were, because you're thinking, I just don't want to lose my children. That's what happens. A lot of people don't like the plea deal system. I think back in 1975, the state of Alaska actually tried to get rid of it because a lot of people advocate. They say this isn't fair. There's two sides of it. It's not fair because it's not fair to someone like you who's pleading guilty. Or what if you were innocent, right? Or what if you didn't, I didn't do half these things, or I didn't do it to the extent. I'm forced now to plead guilty to something that is not true or accurate. That's not fair to me. Or on the other hand, it's also, what about people who do commit really horrible crimes, right? And sometimes it's like, all right, we'll lessen the charge and we'll give you this deal and, just we'll give you less time in prison or in jail. And so people argue, if this person did do this crime, why are we cutting them a deal?
Right.
So there's been an argument on both sides for it. So I could be mistaken. I think it was 1975. The state of Alaska said, no plea deals. We're going to get rid of this thing. It's terrible. And they could not hold it. They tried, and it seized up the court system so much because now everybody's going through the whole system. Most cases never go to trial. The majority of cases never go to trial. And even when I think back to all the cases I worked, less than 5% maybe went to trial, if that. The system tries to do what they did to you. And it's one of the issues is exactly what you went through. And a lot of people feel like it takes advantage of people like yourself.
It's interesting because I recently met with my former defense attorneys and I hadn't seen them. And they said, we were in the system. We did the best we could for you. And I said, I was so grateful. Like, I was so grateful. I would have pled guilty to 100 felonies, honestly.
Why?
Because...
Did they make you think if you plead guilty, you'll get a lesser punishment?
Yeah, because it was, we will send you to prison. You will not see your children.
That's what they said.
That's what they said, right? So that's what they said. I don't know what it was, but also the idea. So I was like, I would have pled guilty to a gazillion things in that state because I just didn't want to not see my children for decades or lose my parental rights for my youngest, right? So I was in this desperate state to have the opportunity to I just couldn't imagine, what do you mean I'm not going to see my children until they're in their 30s? This is what it was in my head. I don't know. I certainly didn't weigh pros and cons at the time or consult anyone. Also, the idea of had so full of shame and guilt and horror at how I'd imploded my life. The idea of going to trial and standing up there and defending myself, I couldn't have done that, right? And I couldn't have. I would be I just send me away, you're not in a place when you're in that state where you can parse what's fair and not fair, right? And when you're guilty, there's no room for what level of guilt or fairness should it be? I mean, now I think about it and I can see it from perspective. It's oh, that wasn't, I was treated differently and in this way and that way from my husband was a co-defendant, a male co-defendant, right? We were treated very differently in the system. I was treated much more harshly, which is interesting to look at, but also...
You think because you were a mom?
Mm-hmm.
Well, tell me about the arrest. Because I know that left a massive impact on you.
Yeah. So again, it was about 11 months from the time I found Googled how to smoke heroin. Everything was kind of spiraling out of control, and I knew that I couldn't sustain it. I knew they were they came over, investigators that come over and from the postal service had talked to us about the neighbor's check and the power was out at home. Everything was just spiraling out of control. And I kept thinking I could fix it, but we were home. My older boys were in junior high and high school, my 3 older boys. My youngest son, Caden, was about a month from turning 4. And so he was the only one home at the time in the afternoon. And I just set him up to watch, a PBS show with all the stuffed animals. And I was upstairs with my husband at the time. And there's kind of a pounding on the door, not a knock, not a doorbell, but a pound.
What time was this?
It was afternoon because my boys were at school. It was maybe, I want to say 1 p.m. in the afternoon. But it was the first time we hadn't been home in a few days. because the power was out, and I knew like people were like, I knew things were closing in, so we were like staying in various places. Finally, like I had to come home, right? Like I was staying in a local like hotel on a stolen credit card.
Because you knew they were looking for you.
Yeah, and plus the power was out at home, so I was like, I'm gonna pretend I'm on vacation.
And the power was out at home because
I couldn't pay the
for
bills.
power.
Yeah. So it was just like it was so unmanageable, right? And there was a pounding on the door, and my husband at the time handed like he said, hide the drugs, right? And I was like, I opened a drawer and threw them in like a sock drawer, But I remember he went downstairs and opened the door, and I could hear like deep voices, and I was just up there, and there's a part of me that was glad it was over. And then there's a part of me that it was so horrible what happened. So I remember he called me to come down, and I'm walking down the hallway past all my kids, my boys' rooms. And it's still emotional now, like 15 years later. Because I remember, like, I'm walking down the stairs, and the sheriff's deputies, and they're looking up. And I get down there, and they, like, meet it, like, in the, almost at the bottom of the steps. They spin me around, and they kind of march us to the back family room, and Caden's watching his show, and I remember him looking at him. I was like, it's okay, just watch the show, right? And so they're like interrogating us in the other room, what are we gonna find here? What have you done? And they were upstairs. They found the drugs upstairs in the drawer, and they came down and put both of us in handcuffs. And I was like, Plea, it said you're under arrest, and read the rights. That part's all a blur. But I remember saying, can I please call someone to come pick up my son? Please, let me call. I can have someone here in 5 minutes. And they said, no, we've already called Child Protective Services. And so we get marched out to the minute they found the drugs, like, I lived in a cul-de-sac. So the whole cul-de-sac filled up with sheriff's deputies, and there's tons of people in the house, and Caden is right there, and he comes running over to like get comfort. He's scared. And I was like, no, it's okay. It's okay. And these basic two people, a man and a woman in a sedan, come in to take him. And he had never spent a night away from me. And I know it's hard for people to understand, like, well, look what you were doing. You were a horrible mother. But, like, I loved him. He had to sleep. I had to scratch his arm to get him to sleep. And so he wants me to comfort him, and my hands are handcuffed behind my back. It was like I split in two, right? And I'm trying to tell him, make it okay. Like, these aren't, he's a stranger danger age, right? How attached. And I was trying to tell him, it's okay. These are friends. You'll be okay. Like, everything's okay. But I couldn't hug him. And they just, he's screaming and crying. And they just dragged him out and drove him away. And in that moment, I was like, I can't survive this. I didn't know, like, Child Protective Services taking him away from me to protect him from me. But in my mind, he was now in danger, and I couldn't protect him. And as we're going to, we get in the back of the police car, and the neighbors are all watching, and they're all outside, and we're in the car, and the whole time driving to the jail, I kept saying, where's he going? Where have you taken him? And when we get to the jail, the sheriff's deputy is gonna bring me inside, and there's this little like hallway between the outside doors that are automatic and the inside doors. And I was like, please, where's my son? And he looked at me, and he said, and he was squeezing my arm really tight and really angry at me. And he said, you will never see your son again. And he said, you should not be anyone's mother. And in that moment, like, I believed him, right? And it was like my worst fear come true. And it was really, I think about it now. If he just said he's going to be okay, like, there's people, like, he's going to go somewhere, like, it's going to be a loving family, will figure this out, like any sort of hope because that that conversation really like a few days later, I was wanting to end my life and tried to in jail. And because I was like, I have no strength to get me through this pain of not knowing where he is and if he's getting hurt. Like I imagined the worst, right? And I thought it was better for my children, my boys, to have a mother who was dead than a mother who was in prison. And I just couldn't like the damage that I had done and caused, like thinking about that, I was like, I don't have a spark in me to get through that. And there's no redemption here, and I don't deserve it, and it's over. Like I just failed at life. Like I really believed that at the time. And part of it was just that one conversation. Like my worst thing I thought being said to me by like a man in a uniform, you will never see your children again. I was like, well, then that's it. Like I believed it.
You tried to kill yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You were in, was it prison or jail, Lara?
It was jail. So I was in the Santa Cruz County jail, and I made the decision to end my life. It was a very like calm, like dark. It was just like, oh, that's it, life's over. I tried.
You wrote a letter to them? Did you try
I wrote a letter to my boys, and I just said, I'm sorry, and I love you, and I pray that addiction never gets a hold of you. And then I like tied a sheet around my neck, like doing all the knots, and waiting for everyone to fall asleep so I could hang myself from the like top rail in the jail. And I was also detoxing from opiates, right? And where you don't sleep for like a month. And somehow that night, which feels, now in perspective, feels miraculous to me in a lot of ways. But in between the guard checks and the lights and the noise, I fell asleep. And I slept through all of it all night long. Like if one flashlight, because they come around, I was out what's called the freeway, right? So there's like locked rooms and then the freeway in bunk beds. And I was, there wasn't a lot of darkness out there, and they come in every hour or so to check and shine the flashlight on everyone. But somehow that night, while I was waiting for it to get quiet, I think I was probably 10 minutes away from doing this. I fell asleep, and I didn't wake up for any. If I'd woken up for any guard check that night, I would have done it. And I didn't wake up until they were like, I just remember that I can still hear the sound of these plastic chairs that they scrape in, push in the morning for breakfast at like 5 a.m. and the lights go on. And there's just like this scraping sound. And I remember opening my eyes and like, I didn't do it. Like, what happened? Not knowing what happened. And I also had a sheet tied, like 6 knots. And I was like, oh, like I'm hiding under this little thin blanket trying to undo them because, not once did I think like, oh, I should ask for help. Right? Like it didn't even cross my mind. Like I was embarrassed. I don't want anyone to know that I was going to kill myself. Like that's embarrassing. Like there was no, like, wow, I'm in a really dark place. I should like reach out. I was just like, oh, I have to try again.
When you tell that story about when you were arrested, when you go through training, like I went through training, they don't teach you anything about like what it's like for another person to be arrested. It becomes very mechanical. It's very like, okay, you take the person, turn them around, put cuffs. Okay, make sure there's not enough, like it's not done in a human way at all. It's just, and so it's interesting because you're trained almost to like, forget you're dealing with a human.
Mm-hmm.
And for you, it's just another Tuesday. But for that person, and in many situations, this person's life is just completely being just unraveled and torn apart. And you're coming in very robotic, and I've seen it like no warmth and just even just something to tell for a person to tell you, look, he's with CPS, he's safe.
Yeah.
If he's going to be with anybody, these are the people that he should be with. And I mean, I was never taught this, but I guess I understood intrinsically, like, you're dealing with another human being. There's no reason to make them feel worse. I don't think ever in my career, like, I stayed away from telling people, you know, you're going to go to prison for a long time, or to use that as a tactic. It's used. And so that's why I asked you, I'm like, did your defense attorneys tell you that what amount of time you're looking at? Or did the police tell you, hey, you're going to go to prison for a long time, you're never going to see your son? Because by law, they are allowed to lie to you. They are allowed to you. I was allowed to lie to people in the interview room. And, you know, I hear you tell this story and I think about, you know, all the people I arrested and what, you know, it was like for them. And look, some people, it didn't happen often, but there were some people that were chronic offenders, and it was just, you know, and then there were some people, it was their life being just like completely obliterated.
When you say it's just a Tuesday, but for people, I mean, for my thing, it was like there's before and there's after.
It's such a pivotal moment in your life.
It changed everything.
You know, and they, like, yeah, it's like, it's the mindset's like, oh, we're doing an arrest. Like, and then we're going to go have breakfast. Legit. Yeah. And then the other person's like, I'm behind bars. Even too with you, what I learned, and you brought this up earlier and I didn't want to interrupt you. I had learned to use that term, the bad guys. We're going to go get the bad guys. That's how they talked about it. The bad guys, the bad guys. And it took time to realize, and I did intuitively understand it, but maybe more so I didn't realize how I would say it till you said it to me. You're like, Evie, I'm the bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the bad guy. And I remember thinking, I'm like, no, you're not. You're not because you're the farthest thing from a bad human being at all. Like, you're one of the most giving people I know. And it hit me. And then I realized, I was like, I'm saying something I was trained to say and not thinking about what it meant. And it's interesting because good people do bad things. Like, good people make mistakes, all of us, you know, and it's not a bad person. And I really, and even more so with you help, there's a lot of things you helped me realize even about myself. And I remember when you told me that I'm the bad guy, and I remember thinking, I'm such an asshole. Why would I ever use a term like that? Even though I didn't know that about you.
Right.
I thought about it and I said, good people do bad things. Good people make mistakes. And I'm no different. You know, and every time I hear you and I hear your story, it touches me because it makes me reflect to all the things I did from that other perspective. You know, and you realize that there is a desensitization there because it's like you're there to be very functional.
It's interesting because I think, you know, to some people who have like very sort of black or white thinking, right? So like there's good guys and bad guys.
But you're trained like that. I will tell you unequivocally, and I don't know if it's different now, but you're trained like that. It's black and white. And it wasn't, and I know you and I discussed this, it wasn't until I started doing interviews, like real interviews, and it wasn't until I became a polygraph examiner and I sat across people and I would pause and I'd be like, what caused this person, this human being how did this person get in front of me? Like, how did this person end up in a chair across from a U.S. special agent? How? And I learned that everything was gray, because you would hear people's stories, even your story about, you know, your life and your upbringing, all the things you've been through. But in training, and again, I can only speak through what I went through. I can't speak to maybe what it's now, but it is very black and white. There's good guys and there's bad guys. And it is not, it's not true at all.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's no room, like I can't imagine there being room in, like, for context, right? There's context and there's law. Like, I broke the law. Like, I should have been arrested for breaking the law. That's the law. I should have, you know, paid for my crimes. That's the law. Like, so there's that. That's very like, here's a law. Here's what we've all as a society agreed on is the law, or however it is. And so you break it, there's consequences. That I get. But the bad guy thing, I think that's why like it stuck me, because I was like, oh, I'm the bad guy. And it was so hard because I feel like it's not who I am, right? But to some people, I will always be the bad guy or the bad mom or the bad person. It was only recently, I mean, like a couple weeks ago, I found out that all of those felonies, my former public defenders said, oh, well, those were actually wobblers. And I was like, what is that? And they're like, well, you could have been charged for a misdemeanor or a felony. Like, I didn't know that back then, right? They just told me this 2 weeks ago. And I was like, how would that would have been very different.
That would have been massively different. So most people get arrested in the United States for misdemeanors. I think it's something like 12 million people. I think the majority of arrests are misdemeanors. They are. To be convicted of a felony is a much more severe thing. And misdemeanors, you can change him, move him. Felonies are, I wonder why they charged you. Was it the prosecutor? Were there just did they just come after you?
That prosecutor, I can see his face because then I had to really try to send him love and light during that whole process. But he,
oh my God,
he was like personally angry. He was like so angry
at you.
Like I was like, he really hates me. Like there's nothing. He would just glare at me, and but I didn't know as I never heard the term wobbler,
Yeah.
and so it was interesting to reflect on it now and be like, how would things have been different? Like how would public opinion be different, or how would my re-entry into the world have been different? Like what are the obstacles and barriers that a felony presents versus a misdemeanor? Because there's a huge difference, right?
Yeah.
But again, at the time, I would the last thing I would have felt empowered to do was advocate for myself in any way. And that's what, that's how people get overcharged. And I'm, a middle-class white woman with the privilege, there's over-criminalizing, overcharging to women of color, twice as much, if not more, right? So, it's just really interesting to I was like, wow, so I would have been able to get some welfare benefits if they've been misdemeanors and not felonies, right? To
you
support
can't get welfare benefits.
You can't get any cash help, So when I got out of jail and, trying to, again, get food, same thing I was trying to do when I was on drugs, right? Make sure I have enough food to feed my son or my children, and be able to keep the lights on and all of that. You can't get public assistance if you have a felony drug charge, at least, and it varies by state. And this is California in a fairly liberal town, and I couldn't do that.
What did they convict you? How long? How much time did they give you?
So in the plea deal, I was given a year in county jail and a year in drug court afterwards, which is a whole other program. And then that got switched up, which ended up actually hurting me by getting rewarded with a different court after. But that, so my and then to pay the restitution, the $19,000.
You were still paying it when we were doing my book.
I was. It took me forever to pay it because my co-defendant, ex-husband, who was charged with the same things, and we had the exact same crimes, two different public defenders and joint and several, which means we're both responsible equally for the restitution. In same sentence with that drug court. Now, the benefits of that drug court program are that you complete this program, they drug test you. You'd have to go back to jail if you test dirty. And then once you successfully complete this program, it's kind of a little bit of an outpatient court rehab kind of thing. They will you can get off probation when you successfully complete that, and you can get your record cleared. So we had the same sentence, the same time in jail, and despite all this felonies, I'll follow the rules. I actually follow rules. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna do everything. You
are a rule follower.
I'm such a rule. I don't even drive a mile over the speed limit, right? In my right mind. So I did, I was did jail perfectly. I never got in trouble. I never, I did probation perfectly, never got in trouble, which matters, right?
Were you afraid in jail?
I was afraid of the guards. more than I was afraid of the other women. I mean, here's the thing, 80% of women in jails in the US are mothers with minor children.
Why is that? Why do you think that is?
I mean, the reasons that women go to jail are different than men. It's often interpersonal reasons. I think women, jail is not meant for long-term stays. That's supposed to be a holding thing. So it's actually like, they don't have in-person visits, the way they do in prison. It's not set up. There's no programming. It's like it was never meant to be long-term. And again, it varies by state and county, but in Santa Cruz County in California, where I lived and where I was arrested, they had changed the laws so you could do up to 3 years in the county jail because the prisons are overcrowded. But if you're in the main jail, Santa Cruz County Jail, for 3 years, you're never going to have an in-person visit with your child because it's not set up for that.
So you hadn't seen your sons for how long?
So when so my sentence, like it took, almost 6 months to get all of that. And the 6 months of not knowing, like, I was like training for fire camp. I was like, I'm going to go to prison and be a firefighter. Maybe I should do that because you could like.
Were they holding you in the jail
in the
while
main
you
jail
waited? The whole time you waited?
Yeah. So I was held there until I was sentenced. I got out on bail for a little bit of time, which is when, we were talking about earlier.
Yes. So I remember this. You were held in jail and then you were able to get out.
So my ex-husband, his mom bailed him out and he got out and then he bailed me out like a couple weeks later. Like I maybe sold stuff at our house. Like I'm not quite sure how. And so we were out until our sentencing. And I remember my public defender when, she was like, this is dangerous. Like you're safer in jail than being out. And I had stayed clean in jail. Even there's lots of drugs in jail. There's more drugs in jail than I've ever seen in my life anywhere. Right?
How do they get in? Do inmates sneak them in?
So inmates bring them in various ways.
Various colorful ways. That's why they do cavity searches.
Yeah.
I've done a few
someone
of those
called it
when I arrest people.
Someone said to me, so they were trying to be polite and careful, and they're like, so people bring in drugs in their lady purse.
Their lady purse.
Their lady purse. I was like, oh, I haven't heard that. That's not what it's referred to.
When I would arrest someone, Lara, and this happened, I would have to, especially women, I would go in a private area and they would have to strip down in front of me completely to make sure they weren't hiding anything in their lady purse.
Yeah, but things can still be hidden in the lady purse. Like you're not,
Depends how
you're
much,
not like, I don't know. You're not like, it's not like your OBGYN inspecting things, right?
Okay.
But aside drugs are that way, but also, so the women, especially in Blaine Street, which was like a minimum security, and there's a main jail where I was, but they're in charge of cleaning they work. The women there run the jail. They are the labor force in that jail. So they're cleaning the lobby bathrooms, which are public bathrooms. I guarantee if you go into, I'm like, I don't tell people what to do, but or give them tips and tricks. But basically, if you go into a public bathroom outside of a jail where the public goes in and out, and the inmates are inside, the women are cleaning those. So someone for the public, say you're in jail and I'm trying to get you drugs.
You're going to leave them in the public bathroom.
I'm going to lift up a bag and put them underneath there. And then when the inmate comes in to clean before the jail opens, she'll take them back. They were put in the meals, right? Their special meal, like people have a dietary restriction or a religious restriction. They're going to get a special meal on certain days. So that's the only way when a meal is going to a certain person. And so, things would get tucked into sandwiches in different blocks, to go. There's so much ingenuity and creativity in jail, and in prisons, and you have, especially for in the women's jail, you have, the reasons women go to jail. It's the fastest increasing population, 750% increase in women's incarceration rates and incarceration, while men are going down, at least in California.
They're trying to figure out why this is happening. Some people's one theory is in this quest for women's equality, we're getting equality and we're getting it everywhere. And so we're actually gaining equality where it used to be something like out of, in a murder it was 8 men to 1 woman. And now like that number is just closing in.
Yeah.
But with women, they commit what type of crimes? Mostly.
Almost everyone was struggling with something drug related,
Yeah.
right? And some property crimes that related to that. Domestic violence, like they fought back, like 100, like I don't know what the statistic is, close to 100% of women are in jail have a history of like domestic violence or abuse. The reasons they're going are often interpersonal, having to do with the relationships that they're in. And the men they're involved with who are the drug dealers, who are committing crimes, and they're caught up in that. That's very common. But you have it's close to 100% have a history of some childhood trauma, like abuse of some kind, sexual abuse, physical abuse. And they're put in this system that was built for men. Jails and prisons were built for men. They are run by men. If you look at the the red flags for domestic violence, like what are the things? Do they control it is exactly the structure that women are in, with guards who are controlling their access to the outside world, their communication, their meals, control. So it's triggering, right, for women who have experienced that. And so I think, and there's a lot of abuse of power. And there's 2 women our age who are locked up. They're incarcerated in jail. They're 30 times more likely to be sexually assaulted in jail than we are sitting here out in the world.
By whom?
30 times.
By guards or by other inmates?
By guards. 30 times more likely.
How likely are they to catch guards doing this? Do they catch them?
They don't get caught. They control the power, but also women don't tell because they're not believed, right?
Right. Who's going to believe?
Who's going to believe them? You know why they don't believe them? Because they're a felon now, so they have no credibility in any area of their life. They cannot be trusted. They cannot be believed because they are a criminal. They are a felon. Doesn't matter who they were up to the point that they got that label or what they've done after. There's always going to be a lack of credibility for me because of that label.
Well, I don't know about that right now.
Well, yeah, but in some people's minds there will be, right? But you shouldn't have to
Be paying for it.
and you shouldn't have to okay, I've reached this level of success or accomplishment in some area. I've proven that I'm trustworthy or good or whatever. You shouldn't have to prove that. In my opinion, you should pay for your crimes. I'm not debating that, right? Can we fix the systems? Can we fix the prisons and the jails and the system where you have 2 courts and one saying you have a year or you're going to lose custody of your son, and then the other side of the court is you're now sentenced to a year and a half. And that's why people are losing their children. There's no coordination there. But I think whatever you should be allowed to pay for those crimes, right? And there's people who will think you have to pay forever. That you should, I should be able to okay, I've pled guilty. Here's my sentence. Let me do that. Here's my probation. Let me do that. And let me do that perfectly. And then let me be done.
Well, you're not done because, so you did your time.
Mm-hmm.
We're fast forwarding, but
Yeah.
You did your time. You paid your restitution back, right? You did everything you were asked. And there are still things you cannot do right now.
I could not homeschool my child. Where's the logic in that? I had a master's degree before I went to jail. I'm a fairly smart person. And I could not homeschool my child. I don't, it's with, as a
You
parent.
can't do that right now.
I couldn't do that right now. I can write a book for Stanford professors, can't homeschool my child.
You have written a book for Stanford
Yeah, I have.
professors.
But you know what I mean? So it's just this way in which everything is erased from you.
You also can't start. There's some other limitations too.
I think on a C Corp company, I couldn't be on a board of directors. I couldn't be on a board, right? Even though there's organizations that want people with lived experience, right? Justice impacted women with lived experience. That's the term. And they're oh, we want you on our advisory board, but actually you have a felony, so you can't legally be on the board or be the CEO of a certain type of corporation. And that's just like, to me, illogical punishment. Like, I don't understand the logical consequences of that, other than we want to make sure you never forget your place and that you like pay for a lifetime and you pay, for generation, like that's how generations pay. Because if you're gonna, especially for women, they get out of jail, they're often the sole caregivers of those minor children, right? 80%. If they can't get a job or they don't have transportation to, they end up going back to jail for reasons that have nothing to do with committing a crime. If you can't get a job, well, then how are you going to get a house? But if you have a criminal record, you're going to get in the underground job market. You're going to get in that underground housing, right? Like I live in, like, if I had to go to a property management company to rent a condo or rent a house, I would get denied because of my criminal record, right? Today, if you own a piece of property, you're going to rent to two people, you're going to rent to the person
Who's not convicted.
is not a felon,
Yeah.
right? So there's all these ways in which you're set up to fit, like these obstacles are so high already. And that's without women dealing with like, strengthening, like, because so many have substance use issues, like, they're working on that. They're working on getting jobs. They're working on getting their kids back. They're trying to rebuild their life, but it's just like obstacle after obstacle where it's too hard. So yeah, so there's that fear, like, and when you can't get a job, legitimate job or legitimate housing for women, especially you're desperate to get your children back or to do things, that's when women get victimized. Like so many of the women in jail who are the offenders are also victims, and they're ripe for exploitation. There's a woman has this like amazing organization in LA for women who get out of prison, and she said that there are people in like the LA bus stop when people get paroled from prison and the bus drops them off in their county. And they get out and they have their clear plastic bag, and there's just like people there waiting to take advantage of them, to exploit them, to traffic them, because they know they're getting off that bus with their plastic bag. They've just gotten out of prison. They're getting paroled, and they have no options. So this organization, they have people there to offer help, to offer housing. But if you don't have housing and you're homeless, you're going to go back to jail. And if you're homeless, you're more likely to go to jail. And you think about all of the children, like my youngest, who was who got taken away by CPS when I was arrested, he just started college, and there was like, he was more likely to go to prison than, because he was in foster care, than to go to a 4-year college like he did.
Does he remember?
Yeah, he remembers. It's interesting because it's hard to know sometimes like what you remember and what are the stories you remember. But he, in his memory, when he got taken to strange, to people, stranger's house, and his story has always been to me that he had to sleep in a cat bed. Like that's the story, what he remembered. He was like, yeah, it was horrible, and I had to they made me sleep in the cat bed. But I don't know, like he don't know what at almost 4, like his memory was, and it was it was traumatic for him. My other boys, because they were in school, they were not part of Child Protective Services. And then luckily, my first ex-husband was able to get foster care certified quickly and take Caden in. So he was with his brothers. And that's the only thing that helped me survive that separation, knowing that they were all together.
I know this. You have a great relationship with your boys, with all your children. And there's parents today who have horrible relationships with their kids, and they went through nothing through. Like today, I feel like we're in a space where it's the cool thing to blame your parents and folks for everything and anything. Your children, like you guys have this amazing relationship. You've sustained it all these years. How did you do that?
I think my children had, like I was 40 when I went to jail. Right. So they had, like, my children had a really strong foundation of feeling loved before I blew up and imploded our lives. And everything I did, losing everything and starting over, it was all done to stay being their mother, right? Everything I did after. So that year we were apart. Luckily I had a good foundation before that of love. You know, my children, like, they've obviously all read my book. I wrote a book about this experience, and what they've said, because they've been asked, you know, at different times publicly, they were like, we wanted her to be better, like be okay, but we never have not felt loved. And I think, like, as a parent, like, whether, you know, any kind of parent, any situation, any neighborhood, any, like, without going to jail or like anything so dramatic as my story, like, the foundation of feeling loved no matter what is like the number one goal as a parent. So I think, like, I was still able to achieve that before I went to jail, while I was in jail.
Did they ever resent you? Did you ever have like to deal with that?
I mean, I'm sure they did, but also they're teenagers, so they'll, like, resent me. But I think, you know, my oldest son, Dylan, he said, Mom, forgiveness is automatic. Trust you have to earn. So, like, they weren't just like, oh, it's okay, Mom. Like, they wanted me to be okay, but they never didn't love me. You know, I was at a book event, and the whole audience was women but one man, and he asked a question, and he said, how did you get your children to love you again and want to be with you again? And I was like, that's such an interesting question. I was like, they never didn't want that. You know, they never didn't love me. They never didn't want to be with me, but they wanted me to be okay. And I had to rebuild the life that I took for granted to have, you know, to, like, be able to have a house for them to live in, you know? And I think, did they resent me? Yeah, I mean, it's like, your parents are embarrassing enough without, like, your mom being on the front page of the paper when you're in high school.
You were on the front page of the paper, but we do joke that you look really good in that shot. Like, if for a convicted felon, you looked really good. In fact, I was trying to help you because when you were telling your story, we were trying to get your mugshot. We couldn't get it.
We couldn't get it.
You actually called me. You're like, I need your help. And I was like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And you're like, I need my mugshot. What?
I love that. I'm like, need your help. And you're like, let's go. What?
I was like, what do you mean? I'm like, ask them for it. They won't give it to me. I was
Yeah.
like, why would they? I remember I actually had I even called the district attorney. I'm like, I need you to help my friend get her mugshot. And he was like, what?
Yeah. I mean, people tried. And the thing is, like,
we wanted it. You wanted it for your book, for your
I was doing a TEDx talk. I was like,
yes,
I was doing a TEDx talk. And it was like,
that you didn't want to do. Your TEDx talk was your first coming out.
Yeah, that was the first coming out. But I wanted it because the point of that talk was just like, yes, I am the felon. Yes, I was convicted of this. And here's who else I am, right? Because we really want people to just be one thing, that bad guy that you're talking about.
Well,
and so I wanted to show, the picture of when I was arrested, November 4th, 2008, Obama's election night, right? That was my arrest.
was working.
Yeah, you were working. We didn't know our lives would cross.
Yet.
And I wanted to show that versus, like, who else I'd been, which was like, I wanted to show the picture of me with the Dalai Lama working on that book, right? So they wouldn't give it to me. I went to the sheriff's office. They're like, we have it. And I was like, great. They're like, no, we know why you want it. No, we're not going to release it to you. And the thing is like, they will put your mugshot on the paper, in the paper, online, on the news before you're convicted.
Yes.
Whether you're innocent or guilty, whether you get convicted or not.
But they
wouldn't give it to me for something good, for something that I was proud of. And that I just was talking again to someone, and my old public defenders were like, we're going to get it for you. I mean, now, like, I don't know, but I think it's hopeful for people because I look 90 years old in that photo. There's no glam in your mugshot, right? Like we have now, but also, like, I'm so defeated, and there's so few stories of people getting on the other side of addiction or incarceration, and that's like the only reason to kind of subject yourself to, like, you know, the internet when you're sharing your story.
That was hard for you.
It was hard. I mean,
you hid it after you came out. You hid this.
Yeah, when I got out of jail, I was, you know, desperately working to prove that I was good again, to myself and to the world, right? And it was like this race, like how many good things can I do in the world and in my job? How hard can I work so that someday when the truth, because the truth always comes out, someday when those two worlds collide, I can prove that I'm more good than bad.
Well, you know what I didn't know? I mean, I knew that when you came out it was hard, but I didn't know until I read your book, The Many Lives of Mama Love. But I didn't know what it was hard to listen to, because I listened to books, was when you got out of jail, you stayed in a motel. Like you had nowhere to go.
I had nowhere to go. I had nobody. I had like
Who gave you money? Your mom?
no, it's like a distant family member
Lent you money?
who gave my mom $500 to house me. But again, like I didn't have, before I went to jail, despite like what we talked about and what I did in those last 11 months and struggling on and off with prescription addiction, which a lot of moms have in various ways. I was on the school board. I was a little league coach. I was a real estate, like I was a productive member of society. I had friends. But the minute I went to jail, like I had nobody. Nobody came to visit me. No family. Like my kids came when they could.
So they could come.
They could come when I went over to the minimum security in the second part of my sentence. But none of the people that I thought were my friends came. Like I lost a whole community, and being on the front page of the paper, I had this whole other part of the community that didn't know me, that I didn't know, who were just saying horrible things. And I was hated. So I felt so isolated and alone and ashamed. And it wasn't like I got out of jail and that went away. It got even worse. And so I was so desperately afraid of people finding out, just because I wanted a chance to prove myself again. Like I wanted to prove, it is like this collision. There's no part of me that was like, oh, I'm good and I paid for my crimes at the time and that's whatever. It was just like, am I good was the question for me. Am I more good than bad? And how do I prove that to myself, and how do I prove that to the world? Right? Now I'm like, I actually don't need to prove it. But at the time I didn't. And it's so isolating when you're keeping secrets from people. So I got my son back. He's in first grade. Like no one, when I got out of jail, I dyed my hair brown because I was like, I didn't want to look like.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I got out. First thing I did, box dyed my hair brown because I was so afraid from that front page.
That article that was written about you, what was it?
The neighbor from hell. They called me on the front page of the paper, and I'm like, I'm actually an excellent neighbor, but I wasn't at the time. Now I am. But like it was so publicly humiliating. And the article written wasn't, like a little bit was true and a lot of it wasn't true.
I never even read it.
Yeah. And it's like since my book came out, it's been Googled a lot. Like,
is it?
Up. Yeah.
I've never.
Which is fine. I would Google that. If like I was reading my book, I would Google that, which is fine. But I lived in such fear of people Googling me, one. I lived in fear of people like seeing me and recognizing me, and I don't know what I thought would happen. So I dyed my hair brown, like a $4.99 like dollar store box of hair dye, so I could kind of hide and people wouldn't recognize me. And it's such an isolating, like me. Can you like how different I am now? But I was just like so scared of the world and so scared of like people, because when that article was published, someone anonymously mailed me all of the online comments in jail with a fake name. Hundreds of them are people I didn't know. Some people I knew because I read the things over and over again, but someone wanted me to see all the horrible things that were being said about me, and people threatening like, she'll get hers if she ever gets out. Just random like vitriol from the community, that from strangers, right? Which is like what people have on the internet now, but this was like, in general, in social media, that was on the internet. So someone mailed me those, and I just remember reading those over and over and over again and internalizing that. And so when I got out, I was afraid of that, right? So Caden's in first grade, wonderful school. The teacher doesn't know, hi, the other parents, and so you're a mom, right? And you come up to me in first grade and say, oh, my daughter and your son love to play together. Do you want to like have a play date? Right. So at that, like when that happens, I'm like, oh, first of all, I live in a 400 square foot apartment, so I'm not going to have you in my house because you're going to see like I'm struggling to rebuild my life. Second of all, if you knew my past, you probably don't want me in your house or your child associate. So it's like such a isolating experience because you want to have friends, but you have to keep everyone like this for lots of reasons. But also I was like, oh, I'm completely alone because I'm afraid to tell you. And I carried this through, right? Like until we met even, but it was like the very thing that actually draws people to you is being vulnerable and being honest. Not always in like, hi, I'm a criminal, but in general, that's the thing that connects people and heals shame. And when you're full of shame and keeping, like, not wanting people to find out your story or not brave enough to share it or be honest or be like, yeah, here's the messy, messy part of me, like that, it does the opposite, like when you, like what I've found from doing the book is like being like, here is the worst version of myself I've been. It actually like does the opposite of what I used to be afraid it would do, which is push people away and make them reject me.
But your shame was on high because
Yeah.
I think it's serendipitous. And at the same time, it was a very hard thing for you because you come out of your time, you're out, and then you're trying to find a job.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like, I feel like sometimes you had like an angel on your shoulder that helped you with some things, like that story you were telling before about falling asleep and not going through with, committing suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And then also when you put in for your first job, the person who hired you never did a background check on you. And that's what brought you, like, thrust you into this world that you're in now.
Yeah. I, one of the things that I talk about like in the book and that is true for me is like growing up, I talked a little bit about my brother and sister, like books and writing were how I made sense of the world. That's how I kind of like processed feelings and emotions and made sense was in writing. And when I had my children, I stopped writing. And I've never I could never write and do drugs. Those two things can't coexist together. So it was only like when I was in jail, I started writing again, started ghostwriting, like writing letters for women in jail to get them like long-term treatment instead of prison or a pass to go to a funeral or a graduation.
They would come to you and they would ask you for help because they found out that you could
write.
That you were educated and you can write.
And then I had an MFA, and like everybody has their skills they trade, right?
Well, you were Mama Love.
Yeah, I was Mama Love. And like my best friend in jail was 19. My oldest son was 17. Like I was cut off from my children. I was cut off from the community. And the women in jail, like, they gave me community. They supported me. They took care of me when I was detoxing, made like hot water bottles. They showed me how to do full glam makeup from colored pencils in a hot pot of water. Like they really took care of me and we took care of each other. I mean, it wasn't not horrible. I still have dreams, probably just like a little PTSD of that. Like it used to be like every week. Now it may be every month still, 15 years out, that I am having to go back to jail and it's a mistake and I'm getting pulled away from my children or I can't prove that, no, like this is wrong. Like I shouldn't have to go back now, So I still have those dreams. So obviously in any book you tell the stories you want to tell. So it wasn't horrible and it was also horrible, right? Like I would never want to go back and I swear I would never go back. But Mama Love was my nickname because everyone has a nickname. I wonder what your jail or prison nickname would be.
I don't know. I'm a bit more aggressive than you.
Yeah,
I think
you would be
like,
much tougher.
Yeah, I'd be like, I don't know though. Maybe I'm tougher on the outside. Jail is a different place. Jail and prison, it's a different animal. So who you think you are on the outside when you go into, and I know enough to know this, that what you are outside and what you are inside are two completely different things. So I may think like I'm tougher, but you know what? You go to jail or prison and it's also who are you with, who you're surrounded by and how they feel about you. And, you know what? They might eat me alive. Mm-hmm. Especially former law enforcement.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that would be a challenge. Or you'd have your little prison gang. We don't know what you do.
My own gang.
Sneaking in cappuccino blasts or something.
That's my addiction.
I
Cappuccino
know,
blast,
I
Dunkin'
know.
Donuts. That's it.
I know, that's it.
That's how I know I have a problem.
Yep. So, yeah, so it was just really hard to rebuild. So I applied for a job from a Craigslist ad. And so I didn't know if it was real or I was going to get murdered, like,
And
I had a car that, like had been donated by a charity to me, and didn't really go uphill. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go to this job, but it was back in writing and books. That's why I was saying this. So like, I was like, okay, this is my first love. This is like what helped me survive childhood and kept me well. So it was a part-time assistant at a literary agency, $20 an hour. And I was like, oh my God, this will save my life. Right. Because when I was arrested, it was in a nice neighborhood in a nice home. Everything got foreclosed on. Like I had nothing getting out, right? Less than nothing because I didn't have help. And so this job, it was 5 to 10 hours a week, $20 an hour. And I was like, oh.
And you had split up with your husband at this time.
Because he was not on the same path. And he was going in and out of jail and still struggling. And so I'd gotten custody of my son back, solely me. And so, and I knew I was never going to go back. I knew that there was no part of me that didn't think what happened wasn't bad enough, right? I was like, no, there will never be drugs again. Like that is not my coping skill. I better get some new ones. And I started to, but in jail and develop that. But like that, there's no part of that would ever be manageable for me. And so, and I will never, like this was bad. Like my rock bottom was rock bottom enough. Sometimes people's rock bottom, they're like, with time, they'd be like, well, it wasn't so bad. And that thinking, like there's no part of me that was like, it wasn't that bad. Like it was and I swore when I got out of there, I was like, oh, I will never come back. And I didn't know how easy it was to go back. Like all the obstacles when I'm like, I'll never go back. And like, why do I see women coming in and out of jail while I'm here? That's so crazy. That's stupid. Because you get out and you have the court saying you have to, on a random spontaneous, you have to have a job as a condition of your probation or your program or whatever you're in. But you need to make sure, so you have to get a job with a criminal record and then make sure it's a job that you can leave on any given day on a moment's notice to drug test. Because mostly, one of the conditions of probation, you could drug test. I had conditions to drug test for 3 different agencies: probation, the criminal court, the CPS court 4, and the family preservation court that I was part of. So 4 different county agencies in the same county all could have me go 4 times a day across town. You have to go within 2 hours, right? Because they want to make sure that you don't like do any of the tricky things to pass a drug test. So there's a time limit, and any one of those things was a probation violation if you didn't make it. It's not even testing dirty would be a probation violation, like having drugs in your system. But if you don't get there in time. So if you don't have transportation and you miss a drug test, you go back to jail. That has nothing to do with you committing a crime. So any one of those things, it's just like, it was like, I described it as like walking on a like a high wire, tight wire in high heels in the wind, right? Because you're just like any little thing. I had a tail light out while I was on probation. I was with 2 of my children. We're getting Chipotle. And I had a tail light out on my car, and I got pulled over. And the minute they ran me, like when I pulled over, I had insurance, I had my license, and the sheriff, whoever pulled, I think it was the sheriffs or highway patrol, they saw I was on probation, and they're like, oh, because on probation everything can be searched at any time, you have requirements. And they saw I was on probation, and they're like, well, they have to call your probation officer. It was 7 o'clock at night with my kids in the car and the to-go bag of food, like a few blocks from where I was living. And the minute they ran me, and then suddenly it was like 6 police cars surrounding my car for a taillight, just because of those felonies, those wobblers as felonies in the system. I look like a scary person on probation. in my pajamas with my kids getting Chipotle to eat. And I was like, no, you can search my car. You can search everything. But they still got all the cars, and they made us leave everything in there, including the food, and sit out on the curb. This is my son, Ty, and Caden, who, was super traumatized again because now it's the police. And I hadn't done anything wrong. It was just like a little tail light out. And
it's just surprising to me because I guess because I'm from New York and so this kind of thing would be.
Yeah, this is not New York City. This is
Santa Cruz.
This is Santa Cruz County.
I always hear these stories and I'm thinking like to bring all this out. But I'm sorry, I'm going to go here because this is amongst all this. You shared this story with me once and you talked about trying to pass a drug test. All right. And this isn't, where I'm going with this one. And this was you were trying to tell me sometimes, when you got comfortable, you would tell me things. And I'm like, no, I'm sure you were like, oh no, Evie, I've done some stuff. And because you and I have talked about drug use and, I think that nobody is untouched by it. I myself have people
everybody,
that I know.
Everybody knows someone. They could throw, everyone has someone they love who's struggling.
Yes, and myself included. And so you and I would talk about different things and you would tell me about ways that you would try to circumvent it. And I think it was at your time. I love the story. Your ex-husband, this is the husband that you were arrested with.
Yeah.
At the time, he was using and you were using, but you were hiding
we
it
were
from
hiding
each
it.
other.
This is at the beginning of that year, right? We were keeping it a secret.
Right. He's pretending to be clean. You're pretending to be clean, but you're both using. But you go home or you're at home.
Yeah. I come home from work and he's decided he's going to catch me. He's certain I'm using. And so he has a home drug test. And he was like, you need to drug test, you have to drug test. And I was outraged.
You're like, how dare you?
I know. So I was
typical, by the way, typical verbal cues for a liar.
Yeah.
How dare you? I'm insulted.
Yeah. How could you think that,
How could you think that of me?
And and addicts lie to hide their addiction, right? You tell crazy stories that you think are legitimate. I told some crazy, crazy stories hiding it. So I was like, well, I obviously don't have to pee right now. So I'm just going to go walk the dog, and my righteous, oh, how could you think this? But meanwhile, in my head, I'm like, oh, shit, what am I going to do? And so I'm like, I'm going to walk the dog. And Caden at the time, he was young. So he was at home with him. And I was like, I'm going to go walk the dog. And then I quickly grabbed some Tupperware from the kitchen. I was a cul-de-sac mom, a little Tupperware container. And I was like, I'm going to walk the dog. When the dog lifts his leg to pee, I'm going to catch the pee. This was my thinking, this is genius. It's in the cul-de-sac. So I'm out, but not realizing that every time my dog lifts his leg to pee, it's like a drop, right? So I'm out there it had to be close to an hour, if not more, just trying in the dark, trying to catch the dog pee, trying to get around every time he's at a bush, and collect enough to drug test and hide it. So I go back in the house with the dog, after doing that. I was gone a really long time. I never walked the dog so long. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll drug test now. And so I quickly put the dog's pee in the drug test. And then it was here, you can test it, and it was clean. The dog was clean. But then in my mind, then I was so righteously righteous about it. Cause in my mind, I'm believing, I was like, see, I told you, how dare you think that of me? And so quickly you're the righteousness wasn't I just forgot it was the dog pee. I was just righteous, right? Crazy stories. And I had, I had a friend come over and was like, are you okay? Cause I got very thin, I was living on heroin smoke and Reese's peanut butter cups. That was my diet every day. My world was very small in that year. And so I'd gotten very, very thin, and I looked like I was 90 years old. That's why I want to see that mugshot. Cause from here, here up, I was, I didn't hate being so thin at the time, but from here up, I looked so tired and gray. I was just gray. And actually, she told me, another friend told me, and she's like, I thought you were had a terminal disease then. I had no idea it was drugs, because you're hiding it. But I had this friend come over and are you okay? You're very thin. And I was like, no, you know what? Because I was I read this book, The Secret, And I have manifested it taught me how to manifest things. I've manifested myself very thin. All the baby weight, I manifested it off me from reading The Secret. Like, to me, it was like such a genius story. You know, that's just like the sort of how much you're out of your mind and believing your own lies just to keep this secret.
It's interesting because your life's taken such a turn, and the journey that you're on, it because you ended up getting that job from Craigslist and working for an agent who published books. You end up working on books with the Dalai Lama, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and Anthony Ray Hinton's book, who is
Evie Poumpouras.
My book, of course, my book as well. And like, you've done like massive amounts of New York Times bestselling books that you helped like cultivate and write. And then the whole time you're doing this, and so your profile's blowing up. And this is during this time where you're just afraid that it's going to get out.
Right.
Like, nobody knew. Was I the first person you, aside from your supervisor, your boss, found out?
Mm-hmm.
Because he hadn't run any kind of check on you.
He hadn't run any kind of check. And you know, because I walked into this job interview, this Craigslist ad interview in his house, and it wasn't the first thing he thought of.
I feel like I need to yell at him for like even posting something like that.
And so I immediately started like working on these projects and working. So I had a good few weeks to prove my intelligence without the bias of my criminal record to him. And so he had just like a couple days where he's like, I can't, it's so great that I hired you. And I had an MFA in creative writing. You have this background, and how lucky am I to get you? You know, like I was way overqualified on paper for the job. And he didn't, you know, I had a don't ask, don't tell, right? Like, if you ask me, I'm going to tell you, because it was really important to me. I'm not going to lie, right? As an addict, I lied. Out of jail, I was like, I will not lie, but I'm not going to be, if you just say, hi, how are you? I'm not going to say, oh, I have 32 felonies. That's just not smart strategy, right? So if he had asked me in my interview, I would have told him, but he didn't ask. So
the third most
it was
popular
only
way-
a few weeks later where he was having a meeting with someone who was doing like a updated kind of job book. And he's like, yeah, everybody Googles their employees now on the phone. And I was sitting in a chair like this. And I just remember that it was like I knew that like air in the office changed, and I was typing. I didn't even have a desk then. I was sitting in a chair like this on a laptop.
Oh, so Doug, because Doug's
So he's on the phone having the meeting across the room, and all of a sudden there's just this silence, and I look up, and he's just like his face is white, and he's just Googled me while he's talking to this job expert, you know, this business, you know, career expert in the field about their next, you know, evolution of this book. And he said, yeah, everyone just Googles their employees now. So I guess when he said that, Doug's like, oh, I never Googled her. And so that Neighbor from Hell article popped up. And and I'm in his house. It was a home office. So suddenly I have become, instead of like, I was brilliant yesterday, but now I am this thing. And his face is, and so he hangs up the phone and he tells me, and you know, and bless him also, because really my first day at work, he hands me this green zippered, you know, those bank pouches that you do a deposit, you know. He hands me this, and he basically, and in it is like a little a book, like a register book, and it basically he has every credit card number, he has password, login to his whole life, and he just hands it to me.
This is the first day he hired you?
First day.
We need to talk to Doug
I know.
about
Well,
this.
yeah. He just hands it to me like, you're now going to handle the finances, like bank account log, like everything. But because he did that, I guarded that thing. I was like, I will never betray this trust, because there's something like in my experience, because I've helped a lot of formerly incarcerated women get jobs. In my experience, and it's not just women, but people who have lost everything and are rebuilding, or who have so not been trusted and someone is trusting them, in my experience, they always rise to the level in which you believe in them, right? They're so great. Like I won't say you, but I was so grateful that to have that expression of trust, that I would have gone to the end, like anything to protect him and and that trust he'd given to me. Like I would never violate. I remember he used to give me receipts. Because when I started, I was a part-time assistant, right? That was the ad. And so he would give me receipts that I would like put together for the bookkeeper. And sometimes there'd be like $1 folded up, like he just pulled out of his pocket. And I would be like, is this a test? Like I could have used that $1, trust me. And I would make sure I'd always put it and leave it on his desk, to make sure that like I wouldn't take a penny, just like I don't go over the speed limit, like I don't break the law now, ever. And so it was, so I luckily I had the opportunity to prove myself outside of the label, outside of the article, outside of the convictions and the rap sheet and all that stuff. And so his face was sheet white. He was like, I just Googled you. And I was like, he's like, basically he said, I never checked your references. He was just kind of like processing out loud. And I had some references on there. And I was like, okay, well, like, I need to call them. I need to, talk to, his wife. I need, it was just like a disconnect between his experience of me and what he had just read. I gave him back his keys. I handed him the keys to the house in the office. I handed him that green pouch. And he's like, why don't you go home right now? Let me think about this. Let me call references. Like, come back tomorrow at 11 and we'll talk. And so and I was like, I'm so sorry. And, I left just like, this was my worst nightmare. And I remember leaving and going home and going, there's no way I can go back there at 11 tomorrow. Like I had my dream job for like 3 shining weeks and it's over. And, but there's no way I could go back and face him. I felt so bad and so ashamed. And, he called, the references that I'd given, and I had worked for a year under for the Community Action Board, this program. And so, he called that reference. This woman, Cynthia, talked to him, who now I co-founded a nonprofit. She became the mayor of Santa Cruz, but she had done this program that I had done while I was incarcerated for women. So they had hired me under a grant to help women with minor children get jobs. And then I, in turn, for my job, helped other women. So she was like, she managed all of this for us. She was in, we trusted her completely. And like a board of supervisor member, he had the calls and people said, no, we've known her the last year since she's been out. This is 2 years out of jail when I got this opportunity. And I'd just been struggling for 2 years and getting close in jobs. And then they'd background check me and that was it, And so I was like, there's no way I can go back tomorrow. And then I just had a sleepless night. And I did go back. It was like the hardest thing I've ever done to just drive through that shame to go back. And I went in and I held my head up and I said, I'm so sorry that I put you in this position, but it's really important to me that you know that I didn't lie to you. And he's like, no, I know, I didn't ask. And I said, and I also just want to say that I am just as brilliant today, even though this, that you thought I was 2 days ago. And luckily he said, I can't, I got to walk my talk. He didn't hand me that green book back. But then there was some fraud, a few months later on one of the accounts. And I was like, FBI, CIA, Secret Service to catch the person who had done it because I was so worried they would think it was me. Someone charged a gift basket online from Ohio. I tracked down the phone number where this was. It was just this crazy thing because I was so
afraid that he thought it was you.
Yeah, I was so I'm always like that. That is the legacy of having that criminal record. If something, goes missing from your podcast studio, I'm going to be like, what? You just get on alert because you lose that credibility no matter what else you do that's good in the world, right?
Yeah.
Or what you did before that. And so, that shame can get triggered. That, I mean, I don't have it so much now, but then obviously I did. So I was working on these books. He knew that I was keeping it a secret for 10 years and so afraid someone would Google me like he did.
You worked there for 10 years and nobody knew.
Before I did that TED Talk where I got up and said, here's the thing I'm so afraid people are going to find out.
Okay. So Doug knew, who was the CEO.
Yeah.
Okay. And then who else knew? You told me before the TED Talk.
I told you before the TED Talk. I think you were the.
Was I the first?
You were the first. Wait, had I already started working on The Sun to Shine when I met you?
You were working.
I
on
told
the
you
Sun
and
Just
Brian
Shine.
Stevenson. Brian Stevenson, who runs the Equal Justice Initiative.
Did you tell him first or me first?
I feel like we were working on your book first before that, but I can't remember. I'd have to look. But it was very close in that time because I remember you met Anthony Ray Hinton.
I met Anthony Ray Hinton. We keep mentioning his name, but Anthony Ray Hinton's story. He did 30 years on death row for a crime he did not
In Alabama.
commit. In Alabama,
As an innocent man.
yes.
And so we had worked with Brian Stevenson on a book called Just Mercy, our agency.
And he was his attorney.
He was his attorney.
Who helped get him off of death row.
Mm-hmm. And so he called and said, he thought he would have a great book. And it was the first time. So I was keeping it a secret. I think Brian Stevens was first, you were second, because we were in Alabama. We're going to meet with Mr. Hinton, and just at breakfast with Brian first. And Doug just goes, Lara, tell Brian about your past. And I was like, oh, like,
It's such a Doug thing to do.
it's such a Doug, like, just not like, he's like,
Hello, do you want to check with me first
Yeah.
before I tell somebody
Yeah.
I'm a convicted
why
felon?
don't you tell Lara about it? And I was like mid-egg. And, so I told him, just burst into tears. And like, he was like, oh, that, like, he just is full of compassion like you were. And also like, oh, that's going to be great that you have some lived experience with legal system for Mr.
Doug's
Hinton.
using it to sell a book. He's
Well,
like,
then-
your ghostwriter is going to be a convicted felon. It's going to be
Yeah.
perfect, bestseller, which
Yeah.
it was a bestseller.
Yeah.
That's the ironic thing.
Yeah, and then it became like, so I've worked with all these editors, right, in
Yeah.
publishing, and so then, it became this selling point at some point, where it
After
was,
the TED Talk.
yeah, like, oh, well, this is great, like this will help in certain projects. So yeah, and it was, I kept the secret not only to protect myself and my family and my job, from authors, and like protect myself from the rejection and judgment that I thought for sure would come if people found out, but also, and because I was trying to prove I was good before people found out, but also I wanted to protect Doug's reputation. Like, I was worried about the reputation of the agency. When I started that agency, I was that part-time assistant. When I left 12 years later, I was CEO, right? That was my
Handling
trajectory
all
there.
the finances.
I handled, that
all the
person we
money.
hired, she like didn't last very long, and I just took it over. Doug was fine. Like I was the CFO. I was the COO, but I was so just worried and afraid of when that would come out. And also I didn't want, like I did with you, I was like, hey, you need to know this this what if, in the acknowledgments of your book, you're like, thank you, Lara. And people are like, she's a felon. Like, it was like, this is going to hurt. This could potentially hurt you. So I want you to have choice, right?
That's
By association.
because you were worried about everybody else's reputation. You're worried about my reputation because you would be the person who worked with me on my book, and you're my literary agent.
Right.
You are. We're working on our second one.
Mm-hmm.
You're my lit agent, and you were worried about Doug and his reputation. You know what's interesting? Because you told me, and maybe because I'm like, all right, it sounds. I don't want people to think that I don't care. I'm like, all right, it's credit card fraud. To me, I think because I had seen other crimes, I was like, all right, it's and I remember asking you too, did you do your time? You're like, yes, I did everything. I'm like, then you're done.
Yeah.
You're done. And
Yeah.
but you were worried about everybody else. You were worried about your name being linked up to my name or Doug's name or other people's names, and what it would do to our names.
Right.
That shame would come over to us.
Yeah. That would, I would hurt your reputation or his, So that was really.
That hurts my heart to hear. It wasn't even, honestly, it wasn't, for me, it wasn't even No. And I remember you said to me actually at one point, you're like, what if somebody says something to you? I'm like, let them.
Yeah.
Because that came up. You're like, I was like, I can argue with anybody. I was like, I have no problem.
Yeah. But, and that was me as like assigning my point of view to you. Because you taught me, you're like, you don't have to prove
No.
yourself to anyone,
Yes.
right? Like, so I was like, oh, because I was in such a place of like shame and worry that I'm just like, oh, this is going to be everybody else's, your experience. Or
So is it because everything was blowing up with your job and your profile? I mean, Anthony Ray's book went to Oprah. She
Oprah.
did a whole thing on Anthony.
Yeah, so
Ray
she
Hinton.
picked that book. So, and that was the first book like that I co-authored. So my name was on the cover, his story, and Oprah picked it for a book club. So I'm, Oprah adjacent in that world. We're at lunch with Oprah after the big announcement, and she doesn't know my story. I'm keeping like it's still a secret at that point. Mr. Hinton knew, and you knew at that time. Oprah certainly didn't know. Till recently, right? So I was, the heaviness of keeping a secret and keeping like so much worry around that. Like I didn't realize like how heavy that was until I got talked into doing that TED Talk, and I was like, I am just gonna say on this small stage, local TEDx, wasn't big TED. I'm gonna say out loud the thing that I'm afraid people are going to find out about me. And you actually threatened me before that talk.
I did.
You're like, if you're not vulnerable, you promised some harm.
I said I would hurt you because you were going back and forth. You were going to go do that TED Talk.
So scared.
You told me, you're like, I'm afraid. And I said, if you're going to get on that stage and own your story. Tell them your story. Stop being afraid. And we had this conversation multiple times. And I think we spoke the day before you got on stage. Mm-hmm. And I said, if you're having moments, I said, call. I don't even know if we spoke before, but I said, call me even if before you get on stage. I said, please don't throw this away. You're getting up there, tell your story. It's not to minimize what you went through and what you felt, but it had become this shame that you carried and this thing to prove yourself. And I would hear you. It's like, oh, I'm trying. And I'm like, I would tell you, I'm like, stop. You don't need to prove anything to any, like it's done. You kept paying this penance. I'm like, you're done paying.
Yeah.
You're done. Get up there. And I think that's what I wanted you to do. And I had given a TED Talk as well. And I said, listen, please get out of your head and just tell your story to people and own this moment. I'm glad you did it because I was concerned you might not, but I think you were locked into it, thankfully. Mm-hmm. And you really couldn't jump ship.
Yeah, I mean, I had a very short time to prepare for this, and I was like, oh, I was so scared. And I mean, I did this TEDx talk December 2019. I got out of jail in 2009. It was 11 years after my arrest. That's how long I was in shame. That's how much time I wasted.
And you were still afraid to do it.
I was terrified to do it. And I got up there and I said, here's the thing. Here's the worst version of me I've been. And here's some other thing. And the feeling I had of just like outing myself, like saying the thing I was so afraid you would Google, not you, but in general, I was like, oh, like the feeling of lightness I had after that. It was like I could breathe again. And it was only then that I realized like how much time I had wasted in that shame, how small I'd kept my world, how not present for experiences I was having in my life. Because if I'm working with all these amazing authors and on a business trip to the Dalai Lama's house in India, but I'm so worried that he's going to find out or look, I was worried the Dalai Lama's going to look at my soul and see things, like I was like, oh, I'm not present to those experiences. There's a part of me that wasn't actually there because I'm so worried about.
You're so afraid the whole time.
You're so trying to manage and protect. I was trying to protect myself and protect the life I was creating for my children, And so, but the feeling I had after just that little baby taste of that on that stage where people like resonated and applauded and stood up. And I was like, oh, this feeling of lightness is a better feeling than any drug I've ever taken in my life. It was the first time in my life that I was honest about myself. I feel like that I was just being me. And And then I was like, oh, I want more of that. Like, I think now there was some people were, again, they put it up a few months later on YouTube and on the local TED. And so, those online comments I'd read in the newspaper article, I opened myself up to that again.
You can't read.
I know, no, I
comments.
don't. I didn't. I started to, and there are people trying to shame me about my talk about shame on there, and I was like, I'm not gonna do that. My stepdaughter put a comment and said, "That's my stepmama," like proud. And someone said, "I feel so sorry for you that that's your mother." This was 11 years after. This is when I've written New York Times bestsellers. This is like there's still that, and I can't, it's not my job to change the way people think, but it's my job not to internalize that.
You know what's ironic? Because at that point, we're writing my book, and you would tell me, don't read the comments, Evie. So and I'm like, you tell me not to read comments. I'm like, but here you are reading your own comments.
It's so much easier to tell people what to do than do it yourself. Are you
not the person who tells me, Evie, you can't read this stuff. You can't. And I'm like,
yeah.
You have to follow your own advice. You can't tell me not to read this stuff.
I know.
You do the TED Talk, and then from there you decided on your own, I'm going to write this in a book?
Yeah, because one of the things I talked about in that talk where I was like, if I'm, the sort of the barriers to reentry and the labels, and really asking people, like, imagine the worst thing you've ever done or the worst version of yourself you've ever been. And imagine if anytime someone thought of you, that's all they thought about. That's the only thing that mattered. And I started talking about the barriers to reentry, right? And these like obstacles and how you're like more likely to be homeless and then go to jail, like all of these things. And the labels we give people and how we make an identity for them, or you make it for yourself, right? So am I always a criminal? Am I an addict? Am I this? Am I a felon? Like these labels and how we box people in, and we lose so much potential in people and so much creativity and so much good and so much economic value in the world. Like there's just so much in our judgment and shame and our inability to let people be more than the worst version of themselves they've ever been, how much we harm people and the world and ourselves and everything. So there was something in that I was like, well, one, Doug was like, you need to do the book now. But there was something in that advocacy that made it about more than just like, here's my story.
It's interesting because we were talking about Oprah before and how Anthony Ray Hinton's book, Oprah selected it for Book of the Month, and then your book comes out, and Oprah gets a hold of it, and now it's selected by Oprah as her
book club pick.
Her book club.
Yeah, right now.
Yes.
Which is
wild.
Wild. Because
and not that we're idolizing Oprah. It's not about that.
It's not like that, but but at the time, it's interesting because at the time when Anthony Ray Hinton's book, I was like, oh, because I was really, now I'm not trying to prove I'm good. Like, like I'm not in that space. Like I've done enough work in there. But at the time I was like, oh, as I'm trying to prove I'm good to the world for the time when they find out my secrets, I was like, now I'm Oprah good. Because I'm adjacent to Oprah. I'm having lunch with Oprah, and that inspires a lot of people to be like, oh, hi, let's reconnect, right? Like when things like that happen. But I was like, and growing up too, like Oprah was like, that was my like afternoon, like watching her show or like getting like, in my mind, I'd like had all these imaginary conversations with her over my lifetime. So it was just very surreal. But I don't think you should have to like have New York Times bestsellers or be Oprah adjacent or Oprah picked or Oprah chosen or do all of these external amazing things in the world. You shouldn't have to do that to be good and worthy and valuable.
You don't,
right? But there was someone who just recently said, I shouldn't have a book deal. Like I shouldn't be making any money ever again in my life. And all the money should go to my victims, right? And I was like, isn't that so interesting? I mean, I didn't engage with this, but I was like, that thinking, like, first of all, like if I did what the court required of me and I paid back so many times more than I ever stole, and everybody's fine who is not feeling victimized by me. Like this idea that I should, never be able to like be successful in any endeavor or know my place, or that I should be able to like help my kids all go to college, my youngest in college, like that idea in the world. It's just an interesting thing in the world. It doesn't say anything about me now, but it's just like this way in which we want to shame people forever.
Because it makes us feel better. Because then I could say, well, at least I'm not this. At least I'm not a convicted felon. I'm not you. I am not that. And that's how we do it. And so I get into that self-righteous place.
Yeah.
That's why self-righteous people or people who have that indignation, I think are very probably some of the most like just dangerous people. When you are in a space where you put yourself to such a level and you shouldn't this. And I always, Lara, like whenever I get in a moment where I start judging people, and we all go through that where I'm like, this person, that, I pause and I actually check in with myself and I say, wait, whoa. What is going on with me that I'm starting to be judgmental of somebody else?
Right.
Because it's always internal. I'm not right. That's why I project that out. And so when you see that, and I do think social media and online and all that breeds a special level of anonymity and hate and just a very ill psychological mindset, just in general. But I think that amplified with this self-righteousness of throwing daggers at people, that's where it comes from. And I think, it's just, myself too. And I've stopped reading things. I stopped looking at things because I'm like, it is not a good frame of mind. But I think when people do that, where you're like, what's going on with this person? To me, when I see that, that's someone saying, I assure you that anybody who's doing something meaningful with their life isn't writing something like that.
Right.
And it's like, I would like to know who that person is, where they are, and if they're, what they're doing at the moment that they're writing that, or what is falling apart in their lives. What is going on in your life?
What are they feeling bad about?
What are you, exactly. Because you're feeling bad about something.
Right. And I think, I only am okay because I got a community and I got support, and I had more support than judgment, or I focused on the people who are supporting me, right? Or the people who didn't judge me.
Well, later, in the beginning,
later,
you had
no.
I mean,
we're talking 11 years. It was over 11 years. And I look at that and I was like, if I don't want it to take 11 years for other people, because there's so much, again, that I wasn't present to, that I wasted. And I don't want people to have to you shouldn't have to super achieve and be superwoman too to deserve that, right? Like, I think that's an important thing. Like, it's not, everybody's deserving of it.
With the Dalai Lama or Archbishop Desmond Tutu or the Stanford
or whoever.
Yes, that doesn't mean I should be forgiven.
Right. Or that is, and I think also anybody's success in the world in any area can be triggering for people. Yeah. But I think when they're even people who believe in rehabilitation, that's good, but know your place. Don't succeed too well, or don't be more successful in some area than I am, who isn't a felon. There's a really interesting thing that is hard to talk about because it gets, people are
Was that why you started the Gemma project?
I started the Gemma project because I knew with the book, I was going to have a big microphone for a while, and I wanted to do some good. And because that Gemma project that I did, the original one, which was designed by women in jail who said, let us tell you what we need for programming, was such a little community for me. When I was in jail, I did the original program. It was a 10-week program. It was the community that really helped me in jail.
What is that program?
So it was, it's a curriculum, some of it's life skills, but some of it's relapse prevention, seeking safety, trauma and gender responsive programming. So centered around the needs of women, how to both balance a checkbook and do a budget, and how to know when a relationship's unhealthy. And here's some art, and here's some nutrition. It's a full life programming curriculum, and then support when you get out of jail, so that you don't lose your children because you don't have a ride to a drug test, right? So that program that I did, I was going to have a job with them. That was one of the jobs that I didn't get before Doug. And
That was your first job right out of...
Yeah, so I had a job managing a grant, but they were opening up for a program coordinator, like a director, who was the person who allowed me into the program when I was in jail. Her job came open. Well, I had a master's degree. I had I taught at universities. I had curriculum. I had the life experience. So they're like, you should apply. So I was applying for this job, not under a grant, but on my skills I had before, and I actually got the job. I went through all these rounds of interviews. Someone high up in the sheriff's office said, okay, yeah, we'll hire you. I had a master's degree, and I thought, wow, this is my opportunity. This is before Doug, right? This is a year and a half. And I got hired, and I was like, yes. And, I had the business cards were made. And then probation said, we can't have someone on probation managing people on probation. And so they cut me off after my business cards. And I remember being so defeated because I'd gotten that job on my own merits, right? Like on my interviews and my skills and my background pre-jail. And I was devastated. And I was like, wow, like even the systems that are supposed to be about rehabilitation are trying to make sure you don't get ahead, are creating these unnecessary obstacles. So starting the Gemma program, the Gemma project, which is based on the original program, but it's a whole new gender and trauma responsive programming for women while they're in jail or prison, and then a bridge to help them when they get out so they don't lose that community.
What do you mean by that? You say gender and trauma responsive program. What does that mean?
It means centered around the needs of women. So there's gender neutral, which is like we're not skewing this one way or another, or gender focused, but gender response is like, let's let women tell us what they need.
What do they need?
They need housing support. They need opportunity. The number one predictor of, they need jobs. The number one predictor of recidivism for women is poverty. It's poverty, right? So you get out of jail, like we said, and you already have that obstacle. You already have a wage gap, and you're going to make 67% less money as a formerly incarcerated person in the job market, 67% less. And you've already got a wage gap. You've already got all those obstacles, right? So it's really women need jobs. 80% are mothers. They need transportation. They need support to get there, because if money's the reason, if you have poverty, women already have more poverty than men in a non-incarcerated population. Women, they respond to the program. They want the program. They want to know how to be better parents. They want to know how to interview for a job or have a resume or have think about going for a job interview. You want to be in a power suit, right? Where are you going to get that when you have no money getting out of jail or you've lost everything? Like when I got out of jail, because I was arrested at home, I never got to go back to my home. Like I had the clothes I was arrested in and the clothes I got sentenced in. That was it, really. Like just think about how hard it is to rebuild a life without the stigma and shame. But even to rebuild at any point in life, it doesn't have anything to do with incarceration, like a natural disaster, like when you've lost everything, to rebuild a life it's hard enough without all of that extra, it's almost impossible with the judgment and the shame and the obstacles and the background checks. And not that everyone is 100% honest and trustworthy, but people need the opportunity and the support and the community to be who they once were, or the best version of themselves, or who they want to be, So with the Gemma project, so yeah, I didn't get that original Gemma job, but now I co-founded the.
I didn't get a job,
now
so
I own
I just
it.
co-founded.
Now I own it.
Now
No.
I own it.
But it is this.
What do people need? What do the women need?
I mean,
in very layman's terms, honestly.
yeah. I mean, because we have a lot of people wanting to volunteer, but you have to be trauma informed, trauma trained to do that. So I think what I always say is, one, it just depends what you have to give, right? Some people have money and no time, so then donate money to there's women's reentry programs in every state, right? Or we can direct you if you want to do something locally. But what women need, like I always say this, like, 'cause I was at this big book club with these really wonderful women who were really responsive to the book and really cared. And they were like, what can we do to help? And I was like, how many, so one, money to the programs that are helping that you believe in, wherever they are. But two, like, how many of you own businesses? Some raised their hand. It's like, how many formerly incarcerated people do you hire? And they were like, none. How many of you own rental properties? How many do you rent to when there's Section 8 vouchers or, subsidized housing, or someone who's incarcerated, you have that on your housing application? And they're like, no. I was like, how many formerly, if 33% of the population in the U.S. is under, so that's 1 out of 3 under some sort of correctional control.
Wait, stop.
Yes.
33%.
Also, I'm going to send you the statistic, or under some form of, like, they've been arrested, they're on probation, they're on parole, they're on 1 out of every 3. So you tell me how many in your PTA group or your church community group are formerly incarcerated women that you're providing community and friendship to. You don't have to talk about jail, just like be normal with them. Invite them to, how many in your book club? And everyone's like, I was like, well, statistically someone is, and they're not feeling safe enough to share statistically, or like just provide community. If you have nothing to give, you can always provide community, right?
In the United States, we have they call it a crime control model, where the criminal justice system is designed primarily behind 2 models. One is crime control, which is you commit a crime, you should be punished. That's the idea, to deter crime, the deterrence model. And then the other model that we have is called a due process model, that the idea that no matter who gets arrested, they should get their due process. But for many, that feels like almost like an assembly line. Like here's next, here's next, here's next. Now, what's interesting, because you threw out the 33%, that 33% of the U.S. population is under some type of supervision, right? Do you know that when we look at all the people who are in prison, so if you look at the entire world prison population, meaning all around the world, the population of people who are in prison, 1 out of every 4 of the prisoners are from the United States. Mm-hmm. So 25% of the prison population, the worldwide prison population, belongs to the United States. Out of all the countries in the world. So you have to pause and say, why is it that 25% of the world's prisoners belong to the United States of America? What is going on? Is it that we just like to put people in jail or in prison, that we're quick to punish rather than rehabilitate?
I think it's both those things. I mean, what do you think it is?
I think it is that. I also think that, I do think too that there's a lack of help support structure in the United States. So many people come from different parts of the world, and how many people really know their neighbors? Not everybody lives in a cul-de-sac. Not everybody knows one another. Not everybody's close to one another. I think there's a little bit in-group, out-group. There's this divisiveness. Mm-hmm. And so people don't know how to feel like a community, or to feel like, my parents grew up in villages. And so when you go to the village, or even when I go to my dad's village, to the town he's from, there's no homeless people there. Mm-hmm. The town won't allow it.
Right.
So I think when you get to such a big place, people look at each other and they're afraid of one another. So there's a little bit of that. I'm not going to help you. You're on your own, mind my own business. I think it's that. And I do think that we do have a crime control model, which is definitely geared more to put them away. I arrested this one woman once, Lara, I remember, single mom, 3 kids. She was committing fraud. Actually, when I look back, I think all the women I ever arrested, it was property crime. It was fraud. Mm-hmm. It was money. I don't think I ever had anybody who had any violent. There were some child abuse ones. But I really, aside from that, and I arrested her. What was she doing? She was running like properties, like managing properties. And when somebody passed away, like an elderly person passed away, it was very likely they were collecting like Social Security or something like that. So it was never reported. So what she was doing is she was taking those checks. She was taking those checks and cashing them. And she was using them for, as a single mom, 3 kids. Lo and behold, she was doing this for many, many years, and she accumulated like, I don't know how many thousands of dollars, ends up on my desk. I find her. And actually, she was doing it. Her aunt recruited her to do it. I ended up arresting her because she was the one negotiating the checks. And I remember arresting her. Obviously, I actually made an appointment to arrest her. She was nonviolent. And I said, look, I have to arrest you. I said, I will do this in the way. I don't want to shame you in front of your neighborhood. I don't want your kids to see it. Tell me how I can best do this. And I made an appointment with her. I went to her house and I picked her up. I gave her my word that they wouldn't see the cuffs. And I cannot recall what I did. I either put the cuffs on her in the front and I covered them. I did something to conceal the cuffs. I didn't want to shame her. There's no need, I put her in the car. In the car, you always put them in the back just for safety reasons, the cuffs in the back, not to be cruel, but safety. And when you process someone, at least in the federal system, it takes a really long time. I took her, processed her fingerprinting and all that. I take her to the U.S. Marshals, and this woman is like hungry now. So I remember, I went to her and I said, "Are you hungry?" She said, "Yeah." And I was like, "Let me see what I can go find you." I went down to the store and I found some food. Like it was like one of those bodegas, they call them here in New York. I got her like some stuff to eat. I remember going up with the bag, and I still kind of new because I was in the check squad, the fraud squad. And one of my colleagues was like, "What is that?" "It's food." I said, "For who?" I said, "The woman." "Why are you getting her food?" "She's fucking hungry." So I gave her food and she ate it, and it was a long day. And then she had to go before the judge. So she goes before the judge at the end of the day. And when you go and you get arraigned before the judge, everybody sits in their positions in the courtroom. As as the arresting person, I'm not supposed to be in the front. Like once you arrest, you're out of the picture. Right. So I sat in the back. And as she's waiting in her holding cell to go before the judge, the U.S. Marshals call me. They're like, "Hey, she's calling for you." I said, "Okay." I go in the back and I said, "Yeah, hi." And she said, "Can you be with me? Can you sit with me?" I said, "Where?" She's like, "Here." And then when we go in the front, she's like, "I'm afraid." I remember sitting there thinking, I'm like, I arrested you. I'm the one who investigated you. Partially, you're here because of me. Yes, you did what you did. And so I asked the marshals, I'm like, "Can I stay with her?" And they said, "You can stay with her while she's waiting." And then when we went out to the court, I don't remember what they let me do because they're really strict rules, but they let me sit somewhere where I could at least be close to her, where she could see me. Now, I just always stuck with me. And the guys laughed at me, not afterward, but I just remember thinking, you can still be a decent human being to people. Like she broke the law. I don't make the law. I just enforce it. And it doesn't mean I need to be an asshole to someone.
But you had empathy, and you were her comfort. Obviously, that's why she wanted you there. I would not have asked for the sheriff to be next to me.
Well, you sound a little bit, you had a very special human being. So I do think it's like, you don't have to kick people while they're already down, I guess.
Yeah.
And like, you don't know how like life's going to throw things your way, and you don't know, you just don't know to judge other people. And I don't know why I did. I can't say, I don't know why I did. That's just what I did, but it always stayed with me. And I always think of you. And, it was hard reading your book. Like, first of all, I listened to your book and it's wild because I knew your story, but I devoured that thing in 2.5 days. Like I was just like, it just crushed it.
What's going to happen? No.
Do you know that? I was like, what happens next? I can't believe it. I think the hardest part for me was hearing you coming out of jail and having nobody, and how you were all alone. And it that part destroyed me. Because I was like, I wish I knew her back then. Like, just to not have anybody help you, which is ironic because now you're on this, your life's done like such a turn. And it's so interesting because now I see people like, hey, Lara, because you've worked very hard for the things that you've achieved now. You're one of my dearest friends. You're probably my dearest friend. You're like my best friend. You're not. It's true. It's true. And sometimes when you call me up, you're upset with something. There's moments where I'm like, you're a convicted felon. Fucking put it together. Pull it together. Let's go. I mean, you got to be joking right now, honestly, right?
Yep. And I'm like, one of my best friends is law enforcement.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. But I think it's that, I think we both had that ability to see each, like, because look, I could have been like, I'm going to avoid all
Well, I'm
law enforcement
surprised
for the
you
rest
did
of my life.
book.
I'm going to avoid all law enforcement the rest of my life because they scare
You
me.
gave me a chance. You could have
Yeah.
easily looked at my book and be like, I don't want anything
but
to do
I-
with this.
But it is like how I think about all the things, like both ways that we've been through together and supported each other through over the years, right?
Oh, yeah.
And
I call you when I'm mad. And I'm like, talk to me. I'm going to
Yeah.
talk to you because I'm seeing red
Yeah.
right now.
you know, we've both lost parents. We've both lost, you know, yeah. And it is that like ability to be like, what are all the things we have in common? What are all the ways in which we like each other and get along with
But
each
you know
other?
what's funny? When my daughter was born, you came over. I'm like, here. You're like, can I take her? I was sure. Actually, you came over. She was very young. She wouldn't really go to anybody. You came over and you are the baby whisperer. I mean, you have like 15 kids, but you come over, you take her. I won't forget this.
Love her.
And you take my daughter and I'm watching this and she's just like, and you're like, Evie, let me feed her. And you take the bottle, you start feeding her. She starts falling asleep. You take her, you put her in the crib. And I'm watching all this unfold because I have never been able to do any of this. I have to sit and like do like this whole process to get her to go to sleep. And in a matter of like minutes, you had her in bed. Do you remember? And I'm like, what did you do? I don't know. And I was like, how did you do that? I mean, I knew who you were from way before then.
Yeah. Your daughter, like with that baby, I was just like, oh, I mean, when she's so cute, but also there was just like this, I have such love for you and I have such love for her and all that it took for her to be in the world. And just like this, like I wish for her as much as I wish for her for you. So I was just like, oh, I can't wait to see her in your baby shower. You're ridiculously cute at your baby shower too. That's so annoying. You were like due in a week and you were just like running around.
I gave birth like 4 days after my baby shower.
Remember when you had the hiccups when you were pregnant?
Okay, we can tell. Yes, we can share this. So I was pregnant and I didn't know this. And I would feel like these bumps, these palpitations inside my belly, like movements, but they were like perfectly timed. It was like boop, boop, like, and for weeks they were going on and I was terrified. There's something wrong with the baby. I don't know. And then one day I asked you, Lara, I was like, I'm afraid. I have a question. I was like, I feel these bumps and they're like, they come at these intervals, like something's wrong with the baby. And I'm really afraid. And I was, because I went through a lot to become a mother. Yeah. And you're like, oh, they're the hiccups. What? It's the hiccups. She has the hiccups. Excuse me? Like the what? Well, she has the hiccups. I'm like, that's the hiccups?
That's
She's
normal.
like, yes, it's normal. And I was like, it's the fucking hiccups?
Yeah, because they get older and they're like swallowing. Yeah.
No.
As they develop, they're swallowing the
idea.
amniotic fluid and like.
Because I was like, this kid has the hiccups like every single day. You're like, oh, she's fine. And so I would call you for everything. Lara, I don't know what's going on. But, you know, you're my dearest and best friend and you're my literary agent. And I'm lucky to have you in my life.
I feel the same way. Plus, I can get you to beat people up if I need it.
I would hurt for you.
I know.
But we do it in
I
a
would hurt for you.
nonviolent way. I'm
Yeah.
like, what's their date of
I've
birth,
never-
social security number?
And of course, I have it. No.
This is where we originally planned to end the episode. But what happened next was too powerful to leave out. The conversation kept going, and we dove into some of the most urgent and uncomfortable issues we face today. Harm reduction, homelessness, the dehumanization of drug users, and whether jail is the answer. It's honest and necessary, so we're keeping it in. An unfiltered part that we think you need to hear.
When you give people out clean needles and stuff like that or help them, does that help the problem or make it?
That harm reduction stuff.
Yeah, does that help or harm? I don't know.
Yeah. I don't think it's an either or thing. I think it depends. You know, I mean, the truth is there are a lot of homeless people that purposely get arrested so they can have a meal. Like, you know, what would you do if you're desperate? Like when you're desperate, you will do things you wouldn't do. So if you have untreated substance use and you're desperate, you will steal those needles, you will I think the idea behind the harm reduction is that we can control it. Because there's like, look, where we are, there's, needles in the beach, needles in the park, right? Like, so if you're doing an exchange, at least you're controlling that piece of it. Does anything work 100%? No. But like letting like if you're incarcerated, you're more likely to be homeless. If you're homeless, you're more likely to be incarcerated. The things are intertwined, and really what's intertwined is mental health issues. Jail's the number one place where mental health is treated in this country. So ideally, in a perfect world, and there's some Scandinavian countries that have like the social support. They have universal health care and like places where people can where they'll intervene. Even I think it's in England, like they'll send new families, they'll send social workers there to support and intervene and say, what are you struggling with? So it doesn't have to get to homelessness or addiction or crime or all of the things. Like, I think there's interventions that could happen along the way, but it's also like, what do we value, right? As like individually in a certain town, in a state, as a country, as a humanity, like what do we value? Do we value people not sleeping on the sidewalk more than we value like helping them or putting them in jail so we don't have to look at that, right? Or we don't have, like it's just a really interesting, like there's no, I'm certainly not one to judge anything, but I think that people are struggling, and addiction is a mental health issue. It has collateral damage into crime, and certainly foster care systems are all entwined, and homelessness problems, and poverty, inequality, and systemic racism, like all of the things. But fundamentally, it is a mental, like addiction itself is a mental health issue. And like, why are we only going to offer people mental health treatment when they're in jail or prison for addiction rather than before it gets to that point, right? And how do people reach out for that help if they need it? Like, I wouldn't have reached out. I was so afraid to ask for help, and I wasn't homeless. I was afraid to ask for help because of judgment and shame and the stigma around addiction, and because I thought, how on earth would my children survive, or how on earth would I be away from my children for 30 days to go to rehab? How would I possibly do that? What would people think?
That you did that.
That if I were to do that, like, what about the shame and judgment? I'm in rehab. Like, because I thought that, I ended up being gone for a year. I ended up like never having a way to have my teenage boys back at my older boys. My son graduated high school when I was in jail and went off to college the next year. Like, I never got my kids back, my older boys back in the same way I had them when I was afraid to go for 30 days. Because what would they do if I'm not there to like do their homework with them every night? But when I got out, I could only barely afford, because someone helped, a 400 square foot apartment, 1 bedroom. I slept in the living room and gave Caden my room back. But I never had space for all of my 15 children, as you say, but my 4 boys, to be their mom again. I think that's the thing that hurts the most. And the fact that I couldn't ask for help. I didn't, and I would have, people would have helped me. Right. So like, what was that? Like, how and when does that get ingrained in people that they can't ask for help? Right. But I think, I took for granted everything that I had beforehand, and how much I would lose for how long, but I wish I had like a quick answer to fix all of the things. Nobody does, but the wrong answer is shame and judgment and thinking in sort of these binaries, black or white, like it's this or this. It is so subjective for the person. It's the same thing when we call everyone a felon. You know what? I'm not a felon, I'm Lara. And this is my story. And I could tell you that 100 other women that I was in jail with who each have a very different story and the same story. And I just think there's like when we dehumanize people, even by, and it doesn't matter if we switch the language up, it's homeless or unhoused, like we're dehumanizing people. We're saying that, or we're othering them, right? Those people who live on the streets, those people who are crazy out there, those people who are addicts, those people who are criminals. Like the minute we do that, we're all going to lose. There's no solutions in any of that. Like there's models of rehabilitation, I think, like in Norway, that are great. They're working. They have beautiful ways in which they help people, invite people back into society instead of like, here's all the ways we're going to keep you out because you fell.
And continue to punish you.
And continue to punish you and punish your children. And generations we're going to punish. That's crazy. That's what's crazy.
You know what's interesting? And you said this to me before. For you said to me, I don't like to go to meetings because you keep talking addiction, addict. And I remember you telling me, I don't like to go there because I don't like the label for me psychologically of being like, I'm an addict.
I will tell you, I that's kind of how I am, like how I got to be now. And I'm always careful with that because I don't want,
yeah, right.
Because there's different times where people will be like, oh, she doesn't go to meetings, I don't have to. And that's a trick. Yes. Everyone's different. But I had a very solid years foundation of going to meetings and recovery before I was like, I worked on a book with a lot of neuroscientists and neurosurgeons and neuroplasticity, right?
Is that the Magic Shop book?
Yeah, just like working
into the Magic Shop.
Yeah, and different neuroscientists at different universities around the country, and learning about neuroplasticity, and just so how much like what we tell ourselves and what we repeat gets grooved into our brains, just like addiction is a path, right? Like, okay, I'm stressed, or I'm not okay, or like, so I better take an opiate or eat a cheesy potato or whatever it is we're doing to like feel better. And it just, you get in these grooves in your brain, like this is the pathway. And so for me, there was something that didn't feel right for me to go every day to a meeting and say, I am an addict, I'm an addict, I'm an addict. Like I wanted it to be a part of my story and not the whole story. Just like, I'm not a felon, I'm a felon, I'm a felon. Like this is a part of my story. So I think that there's something in that again, I have to just say for me, didn't feel right in my brain to keeping myself at a certain level, because we don't know all the things we can be, right? Like we don't know, like, yes, it's yes and not like
I'm more than this.
I am more than this one
thing.
Like I can't make an identity out of any one thing.
Some people do.
Limits. Some people do. I certainly did for a long time, right? Also, I found in certain like communities of that where the bar is low, right? The bar, like, and in the beginning, when you're first like in that initial, like, oh my God, how do I be in my skin without drugs, when you're trying to like not do that, right? Like there's this thing where I've known people who, been going to meetings for 20, 30 years, and they're like, today is a good day because I didn't do drugs. Yes, and what else? Like for me, like I always have to have some big crazy goal, right? Like I want, like, for me, it's like, okay, what do I want to do next? Like what new challenge do I want? So there was something in that, like the bar has to be low and you have to clear it. It means you have to stop doing drugs if that's what you're trying to do, and get all the support and all of the resources to do that. But then like, who else are you going to be? What else are you going to do besides just be someone, even if it's the foundation? Like if I start doing drugs today, I am going to be no other thing. But if I have stopped doing drugs, what else can I do and accomplish? Like that's just sort of my mindset. But I am careful with that because addiction's tricky, and I would never want someone to be like, well, Lara doesn't go to meetings, so I guess I don't have to, when that's their brain tricking them into not being accountable or not having support or not having using. I have the support you can in community you get in like that kind of whatever program it is that you're doing to help you not do drugs. There's 12-step, there's smart recovery, there's faith-based, there's all kinds of things that people do. And so I'm like sort of anti-dogma, like there's no one way, just like I'm like all religions might lead to the same place. Like what's going to help you and your unique mental health and like what's going to give you support and community. I have a community in a lot of different ways, and I have a way of checking in with myself to know if I'm in a dangerous way, which is like, am I pretending in any area of my life?
Are you ever, or is it like done?
I try mostly to have it. I mean, there's always moments, right? But I think it's more like this sort of overall, like, am I pretending I'm happy in this job when I'm not? Am I saying yes when I mean no more often than not to things in my life or to people? Am I looking for external validation? Am I pretending in a relationship when I'm not happy? You know, like it's more in those kind of like, you're not in any given moment. Like, you know, like if I'm pretending my knee doesn't hurt because I've had it crossed for hours, that's not a warning to me. That's just exactly. But you know what I mean? Like there's a little fake it till you make it when you're in a like new situation. I know you don't like that phrase, but there's a little bit of like having confidence without any facts to back that up. Sometimes, let's say it that way, same kind of thing, right? But that's not it. It's just more in general. Am I not being honest with myself and pretending things are other? Because I spent so much time having it be one way internally and one way externally, like in such a divide. So now, like
you had the inside Lara and you had the outside.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So the inside Lara was like, oh, I'm not okay. And the outside was like, everything is fine. Like the house could be burning down beside. Yes. I mean, I'd be like, it's just a little warm. Don't worry, I'm fine. Right? Like that's how I grew up, and that's how I went through everything. Right? Like, no. Like avalanche. No. It's just it's a waterfall. You know, like whatever it is, that kind of disconnect. And so I'm like vigilant for that. But that's not everybody's thing. Like everybody has their thing. So there's like no one right way for anyone about anything, in my opinion. But it's just like you have to have that support to figure it out, have that community, have that space.
And that
have
honesty.
And when you're in survival mode, which is like, I don't know how I'm going to eat, sleep, whatever the things, like when you're in survival mode, everything else, all like creativity goes out the window. Options go out the window. Like when we're in survival mode at this primal level, like I will die if I don't X, or I'm cold, or I'm hungry, or I'm alone, like until those needs are met, it's hard to work on anything else, right? So I don't have the answer. Give people needles, don't give people needles. I mean, it's a whole different world than it was for me 15 years ago with fentanyl. Like I can imagine if I were like active addiction now, I don't know if I would live. I'd be alive. You know, I think jail saved my life. It certainly stopped me when I couldn't stop all the things. It stripped everything, every bit of my identity away so that I could rebuild into someone who is me, for better or worse. You know, certainly taught me a lot, and maybe a better mother because I'm just more real. Like there was nothing my boys couldn't talk to me about growing up because I had gone through what I've gone through, and because I wasn't like pretending. Like, you know, I used to, when my kids were little, be like, everybody has to go to Stanford, because I didn't get into Stanford, right?
I didn't get into Stanford either.
Yeah.
I didn't even apply.
I did, and I did not get in. But I used to like, oh, well, that'll prove, you know, I'm a good mom if my kids all get into Stanford. Like my kids none of them went to Stanford. They all are in college or have graduated college. But my whole shift after that year in jail was like, it doesn't matter whether you go to Stanford or even go to college or anything. Like what's going to make you happy? What feels true? Like that just shifted. And maybe I would have gone my whole life without that shifting. Isn't, you know, like my mom never had a don't pretend everything's okay when it's not. Like she never had like that sort of hard way of learning a lesson like I did, right? So she was like that for her entire life. And I think about that now, like, oh, that's a hard way to be your entire life. To be so afraid to be yourself, or so afraid what other people will think, or so afraid of not looking good to someone else. So
was she that way?
She was really big in denial. You know, she was really good at that. Like I learned that from her, and very shut down. And, you know, she had her own trauma. Like her mom committed suicide. my grandmother who I've never met before I was born. My mom lost 2 children tragically. And I think it just shut her down in a way that she was never able to get out of. You know, when my sister died, it was the first time I've ever had a death. You know, and I just think there's before that and after. And I was so, you know, I was 19. Had just finished 1 year of college, and when I got that phone call, and I was like, how is someone there and then just not there, right? Like as a teenager, basically, my son Caden's age, like trying to figure that out. But what was even more confusing to me and sort of like indicative of how my family and my mom was, is when after my sister died, my family never mentioned her name again. Right? And so you think about that, like anytime I try to bring her up, like it was effectively shut down because my mom would just burst into tears. But like that way of processing emotion and grief and being human, I never had that modeled for me. So luckily I got to model that for my children and learn that. But yeah, it's even when, you know, she was on hospice and she wouldn't admit she was dying.
Remember, because we talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
Because when my dad was in hospice, you and I would speak and I would ask you questions about what that was like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was hard.
It is hard. It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? I know I'm deviating here, but you know what's interesting? Like when you watch these shows or TV and people die, it always looks like so calm and quiet. It's serene, and they don't actually show you just like how horrible it can be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and all the pain that goes with it. And you were a really good sounding board for me. I would call you, and I call you for a lot of things, actually. You're my mama love. I call you, yeah. When my dad was dying, I would call you. And I remember you were helping me because he was dying as I was editing the book. The book was like, and I remember he was literally in hospital now because I couldn't manage his pain. And Simon & Schuster Atria was like, hey, we need this by this. And I was like, oh, okay. You know, and you advocated for me. You said, hey, her father is dying. She needs to be with him. And I said, no, it's fine. I'll do it. I remember you called me and you said, listen, like once he goes, he's gone. So just do what you need to do. And so you helped me garner a little bit more time because they have very strong deadlines. And you helped me through the editing process. And I remember like I had my laptop here and he's in the hospital there. And I would type for a few minutes. And then I would have to stop because I had to help him with something, and then type and then stop. But yeah, I remember, and I was like, this is hard. I'm like, you know, I thought people pass away quiet and peacefully, and you were like, oh no, and you shared with me how hard it was when your mom passed, yeah. and even mentally.
And I was trying to work too at the same time. That's why I was like, don't do that, because I regret that now.
You said that to me.
Yeah.
You said, I regret when my mom was passing out. Yes, and that's exactly what I did.
And I was with her, you know, like 24 hours, like that last week, and it wasn't. It was pretty until it wasn't. Right. You know, like there were moments, but I think for me, it was, you know, is it interesting to like show up for her in that time in a way that I felt like I didn't have people show up for me, as, you know, like to just, you kind of let go of all the stuff that you have with your parents or family, you know, in that moment. But I know I wanted closure. Like I wanted to have all the conversations, you know, and because I'm a different person, like I would try to talk to my mom, like, what do you want? Like, I didn't even know what she wanted. She would never talk about her death, even when she wasn't dying or didn't have dementia, you know, and it was like, she would never, it was just like, no, we don't talk about things. But I was just like, and I would try and like, you know, for my kids, I want them, it'll be easier for them if they know if I want to, you know, what I want to happen or how I want like to be cremated or not, like all of those things, you know, to try and like, and she just wouldn't deal with that. But I think my biggest regret of that week was the working, like we talked about. That's why I was like, no, it's fine. Like we can pause everything that I didn't know how to grieve or make room for any like grief ritual after. I was just like back into work. So I was still in that prove mode and hustle. But also I wanted to know, like, I want to have all the conversations I want to have with my children before I die. Like I would want like, you know, so when my mom, she was kind of out of it the last few days and she had like a moment of lucidity and I was carrying her. She was, you know, very, her kidneys were shutting down and I was carrying her to the bathroom and she kind of had a moment. This is maybe a couple days before she died. And she says, Lara, what's happening? And she was like there. And I said to her what I would want like someone to say to me. I was like, Mom, you know, like really gently, like you're dying. And like, I wanted to like her to know. So she wasn't like, I guess, so she wasn't scared, but that would scare her. But it also like, so that she had the opportunity to say what she needed to say in the world, like closure. Right. And so, you know, this is the thing that it was the hardest thing about that is that, when I said that to her, she got this very like haughty. She goes, well, that is very cruel of you to say. Those were her last words to me.
It's hard.
That's hard. And I was like, oh, did I do the wrong thing? You know, I like went through this kind of craziness after because grief is funny. And I was like, we're all just doing the best we can do. You know, like I could not like accept and forgive my mom for doing the best she could do when like I've asked for that and been blessed with that from my own children. You know, it's like that sort of thing. So I think for me, I'm just someone who really needs to learn things the hard way. I used to be someone, I don't now, I'm not going to put that out to the universe. I needed to learn things the hard way to really learn them. And so I think it was the best thing for me because I became more real, right? And I needed that. But that's just me. I'm not saying like everyone should go to jail and that's like, it's just so individual. But I think I would have died before I admitted I had a problem. So I think if I hadn't, and this is before the fentanyl crisis, right? Like, can you imagine? But I don't think I would have survived. I would have probably died the same way my sister and brother did, which was the last thing I imagined for my life or my children, you know? So looking back, it's always easy to see you know, how one thing connects to another thing, and that was the best thing that happened. At the time, it was really hard to get through every single day, and lonely and devastating and miserable. And what can also be true is that is what I needed to get to where I am. It's experiences like that make you have more compassion for other people, make you have more empathy for other people's suffering. Like,
you have a ton of empathy. You know, it's interesting. You took your trauma, and there's tons of it, right? And you made something of it. You didn't let it define you. So I think so many people let it become their identity.
Mm-hmm.
And you never let that happen.
And it's always to like find the meaning in the mess, like after the fact. Like when you're in the mess, it's hard to be like, this is going to mean
something later.
Yeah, that all I knew is like, when I knew I wasn't going to kill myself, I knew that someday I would look back on this. That's the only thing that get me through. Sometimes that's all you have. I look forward to looking back someday. That's only, for a long time, that's all I had, which is such a little thing. It's not even I'm going to get through it because I didn't know how I was going to get through it, but I look forward to one day looking back, not knowing what I was going to be looking back on. Could have been devastation. It could have been losing but I was going to get to a place where I could look back on this time in my life.
Do you think working on books like with Bishop Desmond Tutu, Dalai Lama, and like Anthony Ray Hinton and Brian Stevenson, do you think your exposure to people like that circle of people helped you or made impact in any way? Or do you think it?
Yeah, I mean, I think 100% helped me. Like the things I absorb from each, I mean, you don't need to work with them to get it from a book, but the little things you absorb, like perspective shifts or mindset changes, like with your book, or forgiveness with Archbishop Desmond Tutu when I didn't know how to forgive myself, or Anthony Ray Hinton is probably like one of the greatest spiritual teachers. No offense to the Dalai Lama, but because he has this profound, like, He was an innocent man who lost 30 years of his life, like the age my boys are now, and went away for 30 years. Lost everything. Got wrongly convicted and accused of being a murderer, the worst of the worst, right? Sentenced to death. Like, you're so not worthy, you need to die. Like that compared to me, like having the difference in that. But when he got out, he was like, if I am angry or bitter, I'm not going to give the state of Alabama or give something else another bit of my soul, of my joy, of my time. And so he really taught me about gratitude, which is like, sometimes I'll be, even now, and it's been a while, I'll be like, oh, I got to do the dishes, right? Oh, the kitchen's a mess when all the kids are home. And then I'm like, I remember being in Blaine Street and being on kitchen duty and having to do the dishes for like hundreds of people. Going, all I want to do is do the dishes in my own home. I just want to sweep my own floor. I want to clean my own bathroom. And I remember that still, so that like when I'm like about to complain because I got to go clean a bathroom at home 15 years later, I'm like, I remember that, and he reminded me of that too, because he has such gratitude. He's like, I walk in the rain because I didn't get to feel the rain for 30 years. So I'm not going to complain about the weather. I'm going to go for the longest walk I can in the rain. It's like that shift. You can't work with neuroscientists talking about how the brain works and not, or dealing with childhood trauma, or like what does resilience mean and how do you endure things. Like with your book, like all of that I just absorbed by proximity. But I do that from every book I read. That's why I love books. Like they have that ability to look at the world through someone else's eyes. Like I'm going to read your book and I'll be like, yeah, I'm Secret Service. I'm going to read Ray's book and be like, yeah, I'm an innocent person wrongly accused.
Crystal Hefner's book.
Yeah. And understand like that trauma, so that's why I love books. Like that's what saved, that was my refuge as a child, as a kid growing up. I started reading and I had a refuge in books, and then it became my refuge as an adult. And I think that is like the gift of books and writing and other people, like looking at the world through other people's eyes. That's empathy, right? That's how we're going to fix any problem. Is I'm going to put myself in your shoes. I'm going to look at the world through your eyes. I'm going to make the choices you made given who you are and the context in which you made them. And I'm going to know that you're doing the best you could do at the time. So I'm not going to judge you.
I'm not going to judge you.
I'm not going to judge you.
You were Secret Service, you were a police officer, you were in Blackwater, you've done a lot.
I ended up working in Afghanistan for almost 5 years. We got to some points where I felt we were doing really stupid stuff. You're going to some warlord's house of Kabul, and as we roll up, the roads just go quiet and people disappear.